Chapter 2010, Titan Bloodline. System, congratulations. You have completed the exploration quest, Giant's Hideout. Rewarding 1 Giant's Holy Stone, Adventurers Association Reputation plus 20, and Adventurers Association Contribution plus 1000. System, congratulations. You have activated the Neutral City Thunder Axe City. Rewarding 1 Thunder Axe Crystal, Thunder Axe City Reputation plus 100, and Thunder Axe City Contribution Points plus 2000. The 2 notifications echoed in Shifeng's head 3 times, leaving him dazed. The rewards for pioneering Thunder Axe City sure are abundant. Not only did I get 2000 contribution points, but I also earned a Thunder Axe Crystal? Shifeng looked at the glowing, dark gold crystal that had appeared in his hand in astonishment. Thunder Axe City was hidden deep within the Icefire Mountain range. Normally, players could only reach the city through a teleportation array within the range's outer region once it had been activated. Teleporting to Thunder Axe City from another NPC city was impossible, making it inconvenient for players to visit frequently. However, as a trade city, Thunder Axe City overflowed with opportunities and resources. Even if the journey were tough and inconvenient, players would force themselves to visit. Fortunately, there was more than one method of entering Thunder Axe City. One could also do so through the city's special tools. The city had 2 special tools that allowed players to visit with ease: the Thunder Axe Insignia and the Thunder Axe Crystal. The insignia only allowed the holder to teleport to Thunder Axe City, whereas the crystal allowed the user to open a teleportation gate, allowing a large group of players to pass through, saving plenty of travel time. However, these tools were particularly difficult to acquire. Players had to become an ordinary noble in Thunder Axe City before they could trade the city's contribution points for the insignia. As for the Thunder Axe Crystal, one could only purchase the crystal with contribution points after becoming a Viscount. The contribution points were already exceedingly difficult to acquire, not to mention gaining status in Thunder Axe City. Thunder Axe City was massive, with countless quests and opportunities to offer, but there were very few quests that awarded CPs. Moreover, players would only earn a small number of CPs from the quests that awarded them. Only high-ranking quests rewarded a higher number, but those were incredibly difficult to come by. Even the most hardworking player would fail to collect 2000 CPs after a full year of work. Meanwhile, purchasing the Thunder Axe Crystal required 5000 CPs. While the Thunder Axe Crystal had limited uses to individual players, it was extremely useful to guilds. With the crystal, guild members wouldn't have to waste time traveling to the city. With the time they saved, they could do far more in Thunder Axe City. Following which, Shifeng stored the Thunder Axe Crystal and turned his gaze toward the Giant's Holy Stone he had received from the Great Elder. Based on what he had learned in the past, the exploration quest's reward included the epic ranked Giant's Crystal. One could use it to convert 1000 level 50+ players into Giants, bypassing the conversion quest. Unfortunately, players under level 50 would have to visit Thunder Axe City and complete the conversion quest normally to convert into a Giant. The conversion quest's application fee was 20 gold per person. In other words, by completing this exploration quest, one could forego the 20,000 gold in application fees while allowing selected players to skip the troublesome conversion quest and become members of the Giant race. However, what the Great Elder had just given Shifeng wasn't the Giant's Crystal, but the Giant's Holy Stone. Fragmented legendary rank. When Shifeng called up the Giant's Holy Stone's attribute panel, he was shocked. Isn't this quest reward a little too generous? Giant's Holy Stone, fragmented legendary rank. A holy stone created after condensing the ancient Titan race's bloodline. Effect 1 - converts up to 1000 players to the Giant race. Targeted players must be level 50 or above. No cooldown. Effect 2 - grants up to 3 Giant players a strand of the Titan bloodline. No cooldown. Shifeng had no particular feelings regarding the Holy Stone's ability to convert 1000 players into Giants. The Giant Stone he had expected to receive could do the same, but the Holy Stone's ability to grant players the Titan bloodline was just too powerful. Among God's domain's numerous races, the Titan's life rating was the closest to that of the gods. Despite not being gods, Titans were born with a portion of a god's abilities. When a Titan became a tier 6 god, they became incomparably formidable. However, the closer one's life rating was to that of a god, the more difficult it would become to cross the final threshold to the tier 6 standard. According to Shifeng's memories, only the king among Titans had reached tier 6. Not even the 10 saints of Titan City had been tier 6 gods. In Shifeng's opinion, they were only demigods. Even so, they had the power to rival Tier 6 gods. Tier 6 god-ranked players couldn't compare to Tier 6 NPC gods. Any random Tier 6 god could beat the living daylights out of a Tier 6 player. Only multiple Tier 6 players had a chance against a Tier 6 god if they worked together. It was easy to imagine how frightening Titan demigods were. Meanwhile, the giant's holy stone before him was capable of granting giant players the Titan bloodline, which was far more powerful than the dark iron bloodline he had obtained. Moreover, he could grant the bloodline to 3 players. These Titan bloodlines were even more valuable than 3 fragmented legendary items. The giant race offered exceptional racial traits, if this bloodline were included in the equation. Shifeng didn't even dare imagine how powerful a player with this bloodline would become. Titans were nearly perfect beings, unlike giants who had obvious flaws. With this, the players that convert into giants have hit the jackpot. Shifeng could not help but feel slightly envious as he gazed at the giant's holy stone. Giant players would face far more difficulties when challenging their promotion quest than human players, but with the Titan bloodline, that difficulty wouldn't be as high. With this bloodline, the promotion quest shouldn't be more difficult than that of ordinary humans. This meant that the experts who became giants could reach far greater heights. Giant players would become terrifying after reaching Tier 5, not to mention Tier 6. In the past, one giant expert had reached Tier 5 thanks to a ton of resources from his guild. Whether or not he had been strong enough to contend with Tier 6 god-ranked experts, he had ranked among the top 20 Tier 5 players in God's domain. Those top 20 Tier 5 experts had all worn top-tier equipment, held at least one legendary item and wielded special legacies. Their combat standards had been at the absolute apex of God's domain. Yet, this Tier 5 giant expert had forced himself into the top 20 ranks despite carrying 0 legendary items. It was easy to imagine how powerful the giant race was. If possible, Shifeng would convert into a giant, obtaining the Titan bloodline as well, but he was a guild leader. He had many matters in the game to deal with that required that he remain human. He simply couldn't afford to become a giant. Shifeng then departed from the Great Elder's mansion and headed toward the city hall. This was the main reason that he had activated Thunder Axe City. Thunder Axe City's resources were far beyond those in the Sea of Trees. The 2 cities were on entirely different levels. Nearly 10% of the ores and herbs first and second-rate guilds had required in the past had been sourced from Thunder Axe City. Chapter 2011, Advanced Shop. Shifeng's carriage slowed to a stop before a majestic castle. A steady flow of NPCs entered and left the building, many of which were members of other neutral races. This majestic castle was none other than Thunder Axe City's City Hall, located within the very heart of the city. Tall walls, decorated with divine runes and magic arrays, protected the castle. The wall's defensive capabilities were even beyond Tier 5 NPCs' power. This was the safest location throughout Thunder Axe City. Before Shifeng reached the castle's entrance, a level 180 Tier 3 NPC soldier stopped him. Lord Bronze Legatee, this is an important location in Thunder Axe City. If you wish to enter, you must register first. The Tier 3 NPC soldier respectfully informed Shifeng as he retrieved a magic crystal. I understand. Please register me then, Shifeng said, nodding. Thunder Axe City's City Hall wasn't like those in other NPC cities. Players could enter city halls in human cities without registering or gaining permission. However, not only did players have to register, but they also had to obtain an ordinary noble rank in the city before they could enter this city hall. Players had to register due to the magic array around the city hall. If the magic array didn't recognize their auras, it would attack and suppress them the moment they entered the building. Security was so strict due to the importance of Thunder Axe City's City Hall. Rather than a city hall, it was more appropriate to view it as a treasury or trade market. The city hall stored all kinds of treasures the giant race had collected since ancient times, including legendary items. Once players became nobles in Thunder Axe City, they could freely trade with the city's giants. The giant race had lived in Thunder Axe City since ancient times, so they had accumulated countless treasures. As long as players had the ability and resources, purchasing a legendary item wouldn't be a problem. This was also why so many players and powers had been adamant in visiting Thunder Axe City in the past. A few superpowers experts had purchased legendary items from the giants back then, while far more had purchased fragmented legendary items. Of course, some superpowers had tried to rob Thunder Axe City's City Hall, but less than a handful had succeeded. Moreover, all of those players had been Tier 6 God-ranked experts. When these god-rank players had attempted the heist, their guilds had invested a ton of resources and manpower to assist them. Even so, they had only claimed 1 or 2 fragmented legendary items before fleeing for their lives. In doing so, however, these superpowers had earned the city's ire and had been banned from entering Thunder Axe City ever again. The cost of the endeavor simply hadn't been worth the superpowers' investments. The NPC Solder had Shifeng's aura recorded in the system after a short moment, allowing him to enter the city hall. NPCs of various races filled the castle's first-floor hall as they conducted their business with the giants. Although Shifeng wanted to trade with the giants as well, he couldn't even afford an epic item with his current strength and resources. Hence, he glanced at the NPCs before heading toward the castle's second floor. When Shifeng reached the second-floor hall, he noticed far fewer NPCs than on the first floor. There were only several dozen NPC merchants here, all of which sought to purchase the city's lands. Suddenly, a beautiful female elf dressed in formal wear approached Shifeng with a smile. She asked, "Lord Bronze Legatee, how may I be of service?" "A senior administrator?" Shifeng was slightly surprised when this female elf greeted him. However, he quickly snapped out of his daze and responded, "I wish to purchase some lands and advanced shops in Thunder Axe City. Can you recommend some?" Normally, only the ordinary administrators received visiting players in the city hall, so he had been caught off guard when this senior administrator welcomed him. Although this elven beauty was only a level 200 tier 3 senior administrator, Shifeng could feel the intense pressure radiating from her. The pressure she gave off was no weaker than Weissman's, who was both White River City's magistrate and a tier 4 great wizard. This was why elves were so frightening. Even at tier 3 they could easily cast tier 4 spells. "Alright, please follow me." The elven administrator nodded and led Shifeng to a reception room on the 3rd floor. Once inside the reception room, the senior administrator handed Shifeng 2 lists. One list contained the city's available plots of land, while the other contained Thunder Axe City's available advanced shops. However, the lists contained very few of both, with less than 50 entries in total. If other players saw these lists, they'd be astounded. Most random NPC cities had more than 500 plots of land for sale, yet Thunder Axe City had less than 50. However, Shifeng was ecstatic to examine the lists. It was already impressive that the 2 lists had 50 prospects. Thunder Axe City was unique, and its lands weren't easy to purchase. This prevented the various superpowers from monopolizing the city's benefits, giving other powers and players a chance to thrive within the city. A bronze legatee status in Thunder Axe City sure is high. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he examined the first list. There are actually 19 advanced shops available? When he had been a baron in Thunder Axe City in the past and tried to purchase an advanced shop, he had only been given 12 to choose from. Advanced shops were often available in neutral cities. Like in the Sea of Trees, Thunder Axe City had advanced shops, such as advanced grocery stores, advanced restaurants, advanced smithies and advanced bars to offer. However, no power would normally be willing to purchase neutral cities' advanced shops. These advanced shops' incredibly high prices were the first reason. The second reason was advanced shops' lack of use. These shops' main customers were NPCs, not players, and one could only earn coins and other items from NPCs. Typically, this was an ineffective way of doing business since trading coins and items with other players was far more effective. However, Thunder Axe City was a special case. Since it was a resource and trade city, a large number of neutral NPC merchants gathered here. In addition, the local giants harvested the ores and herbs from the Icefire Mountain range. As a result, the city offered a wider variety of items, selling these items at far below market value. Unlike in other neutral cities, Thunder Axe City's advanced shops had been quite popular in the past, becoming the main source of resources for God's Domain's powers in the city. The various major powers had avoided renting Thunder Axe City's advanced shops because the only type of income they could earn in doing so was coins. It was not possible to conduct business with forms of currency. Hence, the various major powers and merchant players in the past had resorted to purchasing the advanced shops, even if those in the city's outskirts had cost 20,000 gold. No matter how many times I visit Thunder Axe City Hall, I always feel like a poor bastard here. Shifeng sighed and shook his head as he looked at the prices on the list. The cheapest advanced shop cost more than 20,000 gold. There was also an advanced grocery store that cost 40,000 gold, and a smithy for 53,000 gold. Although both shops were in the city's inner area, both were merely one-star shops. According to Shifeng's knowledge, the cheapest 2-star shop in Thunder Axe City cost 70,000 gold, while those in the city's inner area cost more than 100,000 gold. However, Thunder Axe City rarely sold 2-star shops. But when Shifeng read the list's last entry, he was flabbergasted. What? A 2-star shop? Chapter 2012, 2-Star Smithy. Shifeng stared at the shop list's last entry with wide eyes. A 2-star shop. Thunder Axe City did have a few 2-star shops, but they were beyond players' reach. Even a Viscount would have to get lucky to secure an opportunity to purchase a 2-star shop, much less a Baron. Could this be a reward for being the first person to purchase an advanced shop? Shifeng doubted that the Bronze Legatee title would grant him such an amazing benefit, allowing him to purchase 2-star shops in the city. After giving the matter some thought, he realized that this must be a reward for being the first player to purchase an advanced shop. The difference between a 1-star and a 2-star shop was practically negligible for players in other super large-scale neutral cities, but it was a different story in Thunder Axe City. Here, the difference between a 1-star shop and 2-star shop was like the difference between a town and a city. 2-star shops were more attractive to NPCs than their 1-star counterparts. NPCs typically viewed 2-star shops as more valuable and reliable, so they favored shops with higher star ranks. 2-star shops also operated on a different scale than 1-star shops, but this was beyond just the physical size of the shop. More importantly, higher-ranked shops could handle larger transactions with NPCs. Each transaction with NPCs in 1-star shops could only reach a maximum value of 50 gold, whereas 2-star shops transactions could reach a maximum of 300 gold, a 6-fold increase. After factoring in NPCs' increased interest in conducting business with 2-star shops, the difference between ranks was clear. Hence, Thunder Axe City's 2-star advanced shops were extremely valuable. Countless guilds had dreamed of purchasing their own, but very few had actually succeeded. Most powers had been limited to 1-star shops, slowly upgrading them to 2-star status. However, in God's domain, once one fell behind, making a recovery became intensely challenging. Meanwhile, the various large guilds dreamed of purchasing 2-star shops to ensure the upgrade to 3-stat status. NPC cities could only have a limited number of 3-star advanced shops at a time. Once this limit had been reached, the 2-star shops that met the requirements for an upgrade could only become 3-star shops after surpassing another 3-star shop's transaction volume. Unfortunately, surpassing a 3-star shop's transaction volume was nearly impossible for a 2-star shop. When a 2-star shop completed its promotion to 3-star status, it would undergo a qualitative transformation, increasing its maximum transaction value to 1,000 gold. Although the increase ratio wasn't as great as that between a 1-star and 2-star shop, it was a major turning point. Once a shop reached this maximum transaction value, Thunder Axe City's nobles would visit to conduct business. The items these nobles possessed was far beyond that of ordinary NPCs. A noble's every item was valuable and precious. Upgrading a 1-star shop to 2-star status in Thunder Axe City cost a lot of time and resources. By the time one completed the upgrade, those who had purchased 2-star shops would have already upgraded to 3-star status. Trying to contest for the limited 3-star shop slots would become atrociously difficult at that point. This was also why Shadow had only possessed a 2-star shop in Thunder Axe City during Shifeng's previous life. As far as he could remember, only superpowers and a few first-rate guilds had secured 3-star shops in the city, and ordinary first-rate guilds had no hope of competing for a slot. Why wouldn't Shifeng be surprised to find that he could purchase a 2-star shop right off the bat? Moreover, the 2-star shop in question was an advanced smithy. Naturally, smithies were the most valuable to God's domain's guilds among the various advanced shops. This was the case due to the specialized transactions each type of shop conducted with NPCs. NPCs that visited smithies were generally there to order custom weapons and equipment. Moreover, these NPCs would prepare their own materials, including rare forging materials that players could obtain by operating a smithy. In addition, ordinary NPCs and NPC merchants frequently sold their ores to smithies, making these advanced shops the perfect place to obtain materials. Lord Bronze Legatee, are any of these lands and shops to your liking? The elven administrator asked curiously after Shifeng's long moment of silence. If nothing here interests you, you may return next week. We should have others who want to sell their properties at that time. No, I'm very satisfied with what I've seen. I'll take these 5 plots of land and these 2 shops, Shifeng said as he pointed to the inner area lands and outer area shops. Since he was only a baron, he could only purchase lands and shops in the city's inner and outer areas. Moreover, very few lands in the inner area were available to him, and they weren't in optimal locations. As for advanced shops, a baron was only allowed to purchase those in the city's outer area. Only viscounts and above had access to advanced shops in the inner area. However, this discovery relieved Shifeng. If he had only been offered advanced shops in the city's inner area, he'd only be able to purchase the 2-star smithy along the city's edge with the money he had on him. Even so, the 2-star smithy already cost him 90,000 gold, and the 1-star potion shop he had selected cost 47,000 gold. Very well. The total for these 5 lands and 2 shops comes to 206,000 gold. The 11 beauty joyfully exclaimed after swiftly completing her calculations. If first-rate guild's upper echelon saw Shifeng spend over 200,000 gold on 2 shops and 5 lands, they'd think that he'd lost his mind. With so much money, one could purchase more than 10 plots of land in the heart of a kingdom's capital. However, Shifeng paid the 206,000 gold without hesitation. Rather, he found the price quite reasonable. While this investment might not yield any short-term returns, the profits would be well worth the cost once players entered the game's later stages. Shifeng had only brought a little over 170,000 gold with him when he had set out on his exploration quest. He had also spent over 20,000 gold in Glory Town. Fortunately, while he had been gone, the guild had accumulated over 70,000 gold in savings, despite Zero Wing's continued expansion. He just barely had enough to settle the bill. He wouldn't have much left after this transaction. A short moment later, the elven administrator revealed 7 deeds and handed them to Shifeng. Once he verified that everything was correct, Shifeng set off toward his new advanced shops. He stored 5,000 gold in each shop for NPC transactions. With his tasks completed, Shifeng didn't linger in Thunder Axe City. He used a return scroll and teleported back to White River City. Contrary to his expectations, Shifeng didn't find White River City in desolation upon his return. Now Zero Wing had temporarily withdrawn from the struggle in the Witch's Hill, its prestige in Starmoon City had fallen. But as he wandered White River City streets, he noticed that the city's population had increased yet again. Shifeng saw countless players from large guilds on his way to the Candlelight trading firm. These guild players wandered the city with enthusiasm, making up roughly 10% of the players on the streets. White River City had already become a major city with a player population of over 10 million. 10% of that equated over 1 million guild players, a significant number. Melancholic, has something happened in White River City? Why are there so many players from other guilds? Shifeng asked Melancholic Smile after returning to the Candlelight trading firm and storing the Titan ore he had obtained during his exploration quest. Nothing has happened recently, Melancholic Smile answered, smiling bitterly. So many guild players are here due to the losses our guild suffered in the Witch's Hill thanks to the Starlight Alliance. After our withdrawal, the Alliance called us out to fight in an all-out war. If we refuse, the Starlight Alliance will slay every player in Zero Wing City. Our guild members have been fighting the Alliance's members all over the kingdom, but the results aren't pleasing. Because of this, every large guild in Starmoon Kingdom thinks that it has a chance of taking over White River City. They're all preparing to do so. These guilds really know how to take advantage of an opportunity. Shifeng could not help but chuckle upon hearing Melancholic Smile's report. Since the Starlight Alliance wants a fight to the death in the Witch's Hill, I'll grant their wish. Notify Aqua immediately and have her gather 1,000 Tier 2 Shield Warriors and Berserkers in White River City's residence. I'll notify her right away, Melancholic Smile said, nodding. Chapter 2013 Advanced Abilities Activated. After assigning Melancholic Smile's tasks, Shifeng departed from the Candlelight trading firm and headed to White River City's library. He had been bound by the soul chain all this time, and no matter how he looked at it, finding the mysterious NPC that had appeared in Blackwing City was simply unrealistic. Even if he found the NPC, he'd have to avoid the man. Not even Charlene, who had been a Tier 5 red official, had been able to stop him. How was a Tier 2 player like himself supposed to deal with the NPC? The true goal of his quest wasn't to locate the mysterious NPC, but to collect enough mysterious flames to gain control of the soul fire. While Aqua Rose gathered the necessary manpower, he could take advantage of this time to enlist Charlene's help with absorbing the fallen earth fire, which he had obtained during his exploration quest. Although Tier 2 players weren't as rare anymore, they still made up a small minority of God's Domains players. This was the case for Zero Wing as well. Gathering 1,000 Tier 2 shield warriors and berserkers would take Aqua Rose some time. Meanwhile, after Melancholic Smile relayed Shifeng's words to Aqua Rose began to secretly gather Zero Wing's Tier 2 experts from the Ur Empire and Star Moon Kingdom. She instructed her chosen experts to teleport directly to White River City's residence. Unfortunately, despite the care she used while performing her task, news of her actions soon reached the kingdom's various major powers. Star Moon City, Star Alliance's residence. Guild leader, we've just received news. Zero Wing is gathering 1,000 Tier 2 experts in White River City. We do not know what the guild plans to do with them yet, Purple Eye reported as she entered the guild leader's office. Although more players had been completing their Tier 2 promotion quests, there still weren't many Tier 2 players in the game. Take the Star Alliance for example. Despite being a first-rate guild, it just barely had 3,000 Tier 2 players. The fact that Zero Wing was gathering 1,000 of these experts warranted scrutiny. 1,000 Tier 2 experts? Galaxy Past considered the situation carefully, muttering, could Zero Wing be preparing to move against the Starlight Alliance? Currently, Star Moon Kingdom's various major powers were eagerly preparing for battle, and Zero Wing's sudden withdrawal from the Witch's Hill was the reason for this. In addition, the Starlight Alliance's reputation had received a massive boost due to the sudden development. If Zero Wing did not put a stop to this, it might lose its position as the kingdom's overlord. God's domain had changed and more Tier 2 players surfaced each day. While Zero Wing might have a lot of these experts, the difference between their count and the total number of Tier 2 players in the kingdom was titanic. Zero Wing wouldn't be able to maintain its dominance over the kingdom if its development stagnated. Even the various superpowers faced such a problem. Hence, for a considerable period in the immediate future, God's domain's kingdoms and empires would enter an era of strife. It would no longer be possible for a single power to monopolize a country. The various superpowers could only maintain their advantages and their current status in their territories. That can't be possible, right? Zero Wing intends to strike out against the Starlight Alliance now? Purple Eye was astonished by Galaxy Past's guess. Doesn't Zero Wing know that the top adventurer team, War Riders, secretly partnered with the Alliance? If a fight breaks out, Zero Wing will suffer. The War Riders were a mercenary-like adventurer team. It was one of the few adventurer teams in God's domain that had tens of thousands of members. As long as one paid enough, the War Riders would move against any power. Superpowers were no exception. In a past virtual reality game, a guild had hired the War Riders to attack the super guild, Battle Wolves. Of course, they didn't target the entire guild, simply one of the branch guilds. Even so, the Battle Wolves' first guild leader managed that branch guild, and it wasn't to be trifled with. However, the War Riders had paid no heed to the guild's strength. They had initiated a war without hesitation, and although the Battle Wolves had pummeled the War Riders in the end, the Super Guild had suffered significant losses. Because of the assault, the Battle Wolves still had a bounty out on the adventurer team. The War Riders hadn't changed after joining God's domain, and as time passed, both its reputation and its strength grew. As a result, many independent experts that wanted to earn some side income sought to join the adventurer team. After all, the War Riders' sole goal was earning money. Members of the War Riders had no obligations and responsibilities to the team. Just some time ago, the War Riders' member count had exceeded 30,000. Now, it was already considered a super large-scale adventurer team, and many first-rate guilds feared its overall strength. I don't know. I can never tell what Black Flame is thinking, but he's preparing for something. However, with the War Riders' participation, the Starlight Alliance should maintain its status quo even if Zero Wing prepares for an assault. We should use this opportunity to further our development in the kingdom's various cities, Galaxy Past said, chuckling as he shook his head. The various major powers had been busy trying to solidify their positions lately. Now that the sudden development in Star Moon Kingdom troubled Zero Wing, this was the perfect opportunity for the Star Alliance to become the kingdom's #1 guild. Meanwhile, the kingdom's other major powers concocted their own schemes. As soon as the Starlight Alliance defeated Zero Wing, they would spread their influence throughout the various NPC cities, especially White River City, the kingdom's most populated city. As Star Moon Kingdom's various major powers planned and prepared, Shifeng arrived before White River City's library. The library had changed drastically due to the city's latest promotion. Now it looked more like a castle than a library. A large number of magical class players had gathered at the building, many here because of quests. So many magical class players had come here to quest due to the library's new function magic walkthrough. This function gave players access to the gigantic, magic water globe in the center of the library, allowing them to learn the double casting technique. Not many magical class experts had mastered the double casting technique at this stage of the game, but now that the system provided a tutorial, magical class players swarmed to take advantage of the opportunity. However, using the magic water globe required library contribution points and magic crystals. The required magic crystals were a small matter for magic class experts, but the library contribution points could only be obtained by completing the library's quests. Hence, so many magical class players eagerly quested at the library. After a brief look at the library's first floor hall, Shifeng made his way to the Starmoon Hall on the library's top floor. As always, Charlene sat in the hall reading some tome. She only set the book down after noticing Shifeng before she began to draw the magic array that would help him absorb the fallen earth fire. Once the magic array took shape, Shifeng retrieved the fallen earth fire and wrapped the soul fire's scorching flames around it. However, fusing with the fallen earth fire proved far more difficult than fusing with the purple thunder flame. This time, Shifeng felt as if he were trying to wrap a sheet of paper around a bonfire. His control of the soul fire had to be precise. The slightest mistake could throw the process off balance, which would cause the fusion to fail. After 32 subsequent failures, Shifeng finally encased the fallen earth fire in soul fire successfully. The moment the fusion succeeded, flames devoured his body. He felt the flames burn and sting his flesh as he succumbed to a splitting headache. Shortly after, the sound of a system notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. You have successfully fused the fallen earth fire and activated the soul fire's advanced abilities. Chapter 2014, Soul Cleansing. I still don't have full control? When Shifeng heard the system notification, he was disappointed. The soul fire really is troublesome. He could only shed his worries about the soul chain by gaining full control of the soul fire. However, he hadn't expected 2 Tier 3 mysterious flames to not be enough. Tier 3 mysterious flames were as valuable as fragmented legendary items. It was easy to imagine how hard they were to obtain, yet the system informed him that he needed more. Who knew when he would encounter another Tier 3 mysterious flame? It really is surprising that you managed to obtain 2 Tier 3 mysterious flames in such a short time. Although you haven't gained full control over the soul fire, fusing it with 2 Tier 3 mysterious flames has increased your compatibility with it. Now you won't have to worry about the soul chain's corrosion for another 300 days, Charlene, who wore a crimson dress, said and nodded approvingly as she watched Shifeng. Moreover, there are benefits to being compatible with the soul fire, so don't look so dejected. Benefits? Shifeng muttered skeptically as he gazed at the blue fire enveloping his body. He didn't understand how the soul fire's present state could benefit him in any way. His entire body stung with pain. Any ordinary player would wail like a ghost if they were in his position, but even though he could endure the pain, it made concentrating difficult. At this moment he'd likely even fail to execute the simplest combat technique. Learn to appreciate what you have. The soul fire is currently cleansing your soul, Charlene explained as she rolled her eyes at Shifeng. This is soul cleansing? Charlene's words astonished Shifeng. So this is the soul fire's advanced ability. He had heard about soul cleansing during his previous life. It was one of the few methods to improve players' concentration attribute. If ranked by importance, one could argue that concentration stood above stamina. When players fought in God's domain, they used 2 hidden attributes, stamina and concentration. In the event of stamina exhaustion, players would lose the ability to move. In the case of concentration depletion, players would pass out. God's domain provided far fewer methods of increasing one's concentration than those available for improving stamina, which was one of the reasons that the former was more important. Generally, players' concentration only improved when they increased their basic attributes in tiers. Concentration's ability to affect a player's mental state was another reason. Players had only discovered this quite some time after God's domain had launched. This effect was similar to the experience players had when in areas with high mana density. In truth, players felt more comfortable around denser mana due to the mana elevating their concentration. In other words, higher concentration allowed players to focus and maintain their calm more easily. The higher a player's concentration was, the more physical control they'd have. This was the third and most important reason. Players could manipulate their physical limits more easily, which was why, after reaching higher tiers, players could execute actions or techniques that their bodies couldn't previously handle. For example, a Tier 2 player might struggle to master a complex advanced combat technique, but could do so after reaching Tier 3. These were the reasons that all of God's domain's experts had frantically sought to improve their concentration in Shifeng's previous life. Unfortunately, the available methods to do so were just as rare as fragmented legendary items. The various superpowers would have even gone to war over a discovered method. In the past, there had been multiple instances of items that could increase concentration appearing in the dark auction. The various superpowers had even willingly traded fragmented legendary items for items that only granted a 5% boost to concentration. They had even exchanged fragmented legendary weapons for items that granted a 10% boost without hesitation. As far as Shifeng could remember, soul cleansing provided between 5% and 15% more concentration. He had never dreamed that he'd get to experience the phenomenon now. After 10 minutes or so, the blue flames finally subsided. When they did, Shifeng felt more refreshed than he ever had before. Both his physical control and mental clarity had improved drastically. He immediately unsheathed Killing Ray and executed Swords Transmigration. Mesmerizing stars twinkled around Shifeng. If ordinary players were to see this scene, they'd assume that he had used some skill rather than a combat technique. Amazing. Shifeng's eyes glowed with excitement as he stared at the sacred sword in his hand. When he had used Swords Transmigration in the past, the bronze combat technique had taken a massive toll on his stamina and concentration. He could only execute the technique about 20 times before it affected his physical performance. However, not only could he execute Swords Transmigration with greater precision after undergoing the soul cleansing, but his stamina and concentration consumption had decreased as well. Now, he estimated that he could execute Swords Transmigration 30 times before it affected his performance. This improvement was simply terrifying. Moreover, his sword slashes were visibly faster and nimbler than before. He had only been able to alter his swing 4 times before, and only 5 times when he fought in peak condition, but now he could execute 5 alterations without reaching his limits. Shifeng felt as if he could fight a domain realm expert without losing ground, even without relying on Swords Transmigration, and when both combatants' basic attributes were equal. Once Shifeng finished reveling in his recent improvements, he left the library and made his way to the guild residence. By now, 1,000 Tier 2 shield warriors and berserkers had gathered in Zero Wing's residence, waiting in the second-floor hall. Why did the Vice Guild leader suddenly recall so many of us? Are we going to attack the Starlight Alliance? That's likely. However, we won't be able to take out those monster players with just shield warriors and berserkers. Maybe we're going on a quest. Many of these Tier 2 experts were curious about Aqua Rose's sudden summons, and they all discussed the situation as they waited. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's members felt a surge of motivation after witnessing so many expert players gather. They hadn't realized that their guild had so many Tier 2 experts. If there were already 1,000 Tier 2 shield warriors and berserkers, it was easy to imagine how many more Tier 2 experts were in Zero Wing. Moreover, every one of these Tier 2 players had already reached level 60. Only peak experts had reached such a high level thus far. Many peak experts from first-rate guilds had only recently reached level 60. Guild leader, everyone's here, Aqua Rose said as Shifeng entered the guild hall. Worriedly she continued, but guild leader, do you intend to fight the Starlight Alliance in the Witch's Hill? I have seen those monster players' strength. Without berserk skills, our Tier 2 experts have no hope against them. Those monster players? Shaking his head, Shifeng said, no, that's not the plan. Aqua Rose could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. If they faced the Starlight Alliance in the Witch's Hill now, they'd be at a severe disadvantage. If they wanted to defeat the Alliance, they had to accumulate enough magic-breaking crossbows and basic combat devices. My target is the Starlight Alliance's WildhammerTown, Shifeng declared. Notify everyone to prepare master regeneration potions. Those that don't have any can collect some from the guild warehouse. Once they're ready, send them to teleport to Zero Wing City. Chapter 2015 Approaching Storm. WildhammerTown? Aqua Rose was stunned to hear Shifeng's target. WildhammerTown was one of the 2 guild towns in the Witch's Hill. It was also the town that Knight's Judgment poured its resources into developing. At this point, the town had as many as 12 defense turrets. How were they supposed to capture the town with just 1,000 Tier 2 players? Emicha. WildhammerTown doesn't need to exist anymore. Shifeng nodded, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. Sensing the killing intent radiating from Shifeng, Aqua Rose recognized his determination. She was at a loss for words. Zero Wing had never tried to stop any of the large guilds from developing in the Witch's Hill. After all, the more popular the Witch's Hill became, the more of an asset it would be to Zero Wing. However, not only had the Starlight Alliance openly declared war on Zero Wing, but it had also made multiple attempts to provoke the guild. It was only natural that Zero Wing issue a response. Unfortunately, WildhammerTown's defenses easily surpassed those of a basic town. Even several tens of thousands of elite and expert players might not be enough to capture a normally fortified basic town, much less WildhammerTown, which the Starlight Alliance had invested a ton of resources and manpower into. When Shifeng finished speaking, he turned on his heel and headed toward the guild warehouse, leaving behind a worried Aqua Rose in the guild hall's threshold. Aqua Rose promptly recovered and notified the 1,000 Tier 2 experts of Shifeng's instructions. She had them collect their master regeneration potions and teleport to Zero Wing City. Shortly after the Tier 2 experts left, a few spies hiding in Zero Wing reported to their superiors in the various large guilds. What? Zero Wing plans to fight the Starlight Alliance in the Witch's Hill. It seems we'll get an interesting show in the Witch's Hill soon. Notify our guild members. Everyone is to prepare to move at a moment's notice. Once Zero Wing has been defeated, we'll attack its guild members in the fields. We cannot let the kingdom's other guilds steal this opportunity to make a name for themselves. When the various major powers' upper echelons learned that the 1,000-man team of Tier 2 experts in Zero Wing's White River City residence had teleported to Zero Wing City, they knew that the guild had gotten serious. They immediately commanded their guild members to prepare for Zero Wing's defeat. When news of Zero Wing's movements reached the Starlight Alliance, the allied guilds made their own preparations. Zero Wing is finally on the move. Zero Wing is, after all, Starmoon Kingdom's #1 guild. To protect its reputation, Zero Wing must fight us. How could it continue in the kingdom if it hides like a coward? Notify the War Riders. Tell them to gather in the Witch's Hill. We have so many monster players and experts on our side. Including the War Riders who are equipped for large-scale field combat, will force Zero Wing into ruin. Hopefully Zero Wing doesn't surrender too quickly. I don't want our plan to whittle down Zero Wing's main force to go to waste. In that case, we should deliberately act weak and let Zero Wing assume that victory is within its grasp. That way we'll be able to sap away the guild's strength. Right. Let's do that. Notify our teams to hold back a little. However, they are to kill as many players wielding magic-breaking crossbows and basic combat devices as possible. The various representatives in the Starlight Alliance's meeting voiced their opinions. Soon they all reached a consensus and decided to toy with Zero Wing on the battlefield. For a time, the experts from the Starlight Alliance's dozen or so member guilds gathered in the Witch's Hill. At the same time, a large group of players from the War Riders Adventurer team appeared in Zero Wing City. Despite being Adventurer team members, these players moved with the discipline of guild players. Not only were all of them level 57 or higher, but they also had over 1,000 Tier 2 players with them. It wasn't long before the players in the teleportation hall noticed these Adventurer team members. Zero Wing? I've been hearing this name for so long. Hopefully the guild isn't too disappointing, a level 60, Tier 2 Guardian Knight muttered as he exited the teleportation array and glanced over Zero Wing City's teleportation hall, a hint of excitement shining in his eyes. When Adventurer team experts in the hall noticed this cloaked shield warrior with a mana-imbued shield in the hall, they gasped. Why is Roaring Flame here? Are the War Riders participating in the guild war? Many experts were shocked as they stared at this unruly middle-aged man. The War Riders Adventurer team was among the best adventurer teams in God's domain right now. Roaring Flame, the War Riders commander, even ranked among the top 100 on the God's Domain's experts list. Countless adventurer team players in God's domain revered him as an idol. With the War Riders' sudden appearance in a backwater area like Starmoon Kingdom, why wouldn't these players be surprised? For a time, tension shot through Zero Wing City due to the War Riders' presence. Zero Wing's members were particularly concerned when they saw the War Riders' multiple 1,000-man teams marching through the city streets. Meanwhile, in Zero Wing City's residence, guild leader, members of the War Riders Adventurer team have appeared in Zero Wing City, Aqua Rose reported to Shifeng. I suspect that the Starlight Alliance has invited them here. Why don't we eliminate them? She was quite familiar with the War Riders' adventurer Tarn. Unlike orthodox adventurer teams, the War Riders operated like a band of mercenaries. Not only were the adventurer team's members individually powerful, but they were also particularly adept in large-scale combat as a team. The War Riders had proved their capacity for top-notch battle strategies and formations that allowed the team members to exhibit greater strength than it should reasonably be able to. Many superpowers had suffered significant losses at the War Riders' hands. In Aqua Rose's opinion, the fact that the War Riders had arrived in Zero Wing City spelled nothing good for the guild. If the adventurer team wanted to develop in the Witch's Hill, it should seek permission from Zero Wing first. The fact that the adventurer team hadn't meant that it was under the Starlight Alliance's employ. Meanwhile, now that the War Riders were inside Zero Wing City, the guild had the home ground advantage. This was the perfect opportunity to remove the adventurer team from the equation. With Zero Wing's defenses, not even the infamous War Riders had any hope of leaving the city alive. Forget it. Even though they have allied with the Starlight Alliance, they haven't openly opposed us. If we kill them in Zero Wing City, it will only cause a panic among the independent players and various adventurer teams in the city, which would be detrimental to Zero Wing's development, Shifeng said, chuckling as he shook his head. Roaring Flame should have considered this in Shifeng's opinion, so the man teleported to Zero Wing City alongside his teammates. Shifeng had to admit that the Roaring Flame was a calculating individual. It was no wonder why the War Riders had become one of God's Domain's true top adventurer teams in the past, an existence that even the various superpowers had feared. I guess you're right, but I don't like the idea of letting them take advantage of us, Aqua Rose grumbled, frustrated. Despite the War Riders' bold use of their teleportation services, they couldn't do anything about it. Take advantage of us? Shifeng laughed. Our services are not that easy to take advantage of. Renew the teleportation settings. For today only, adjust Zero Wing City's teleportation fees to their maximum. The War Riders can use our services as much as they want to. Understood. I'll see to it immediately. Aqua Rose joyfully replied. If they adjusted the teleportation fee to the maximum, even Tier 2 experts would wince at the expense. Chapter 2016 Giant Conversion Zero Wing, 4 Towers of Elements. Due to the 4 Towers of Elements teleportation ability and the Witch's Hill's popularity, an extraordinarily large number of players gathered at the towers to use the teleportation service each day. Even though the Starlight Alliance had placed a teleportation seal on Zero Wing City, such teleportation seals could only be maintained for a certain time. Constant seals didn't exist. Hence, for the sake of safe and convenient travel, players still visited the 4 Towers of Elements. However, the players currently visiting the towers were in an uproar. What's going on? Why is the teleportation fee suddenly so expensive? I'm only traveling within the Witch's Hill map, yet I have to pay more than 1 gold? This is daylight robbery. Even as a Tier 2 player, I only earn 1 or 2 gold coins and profit per day in the Witch's Hill. Has Zero Wing gone insane? The players visiting the 4 Towers of Elements heatedly debated over the sudden increase in teleportation fees. Meanwhile, the multiple 1,000-man teams that had lined up in one of the towers was just as stunned by the discovery. Commander, Zero Wing is too sinister. It raised the teleportation fee. We have 20,000 people that need to travel, which will cost more than 23,000 gold in total. Zero Wing has done this on purpose. A female, Tier 2 cursemancer in a set of grey robes fumed as she complained to Roaring Flame. Although their adventurer team had a lot of members, they didn't have nearly as many funds as a first-rate guild. Currently, they had only saved up around 70,000 gold in their shared warehouse. If they spent over 23,000 gold on teleportation fees, they would lose over 1/3 of their adventurer team's liquid funds, significantly impacting their ability to purchase resources and nurture new members. It seems Zero Wing has noticed us, but this type of greeting is certainly unorthodox, Roaring Flame said, laughing. Since Zero Wing doesn't want to allow us to teleport out of the city, we'll walk. Zero Wing is cowardly. It is afraid of us working with the Starlight Alliance against its forces, so it has used this plan deliberately to buy time? The level 59 Tier 2 cursemancer asked, clicking her tongue. I had thought Zero Wing was a mysterious and powerful guild, but it seems that there's nothing really special about it after all. Does Zero Wing really think delaying us will change anything? With no other choice, the War Riders left Zero Wing City through the city's entrance. Meanwhile, a 100-man team stood on the top floor of the tower the War Riders had left. Although these team members had hidden under black cloaks, their auras were intense enough to drive Tier 2 players away. If Shi Feng were present, he would have noticed that this 100-man team consisted of Blackwater's Heavenly Eagle Legion, established by Wuxia. Quite a few of these players were Refinement Realm experts, and Snow Scar, the leader of the team, had recently risen through the ranks on the God's Domains experts list, earning the title of Spear Demon. So, it's true, as the report stated, the War Riders have joined the Starlight Alliance. Zero Wing is in for a tough fight. Zero Wing is pitiful. It's going to lose its position as Star Moon Kingdom's #1 guild before we even have a chance to take action. That's right. Sin Realm has deep connections with Beast Emperor, so the guild has gotten its hands on the power to transform players into monsters. Based on what we've learned, the Star Alliance has prepared over 3,000 monster players to ensure Zero Wing's destruction. It's also dispatched another 20,000 experts, and the War Riders are providing reinforcements. As long as Zero Wing leaves this city, the Starlight Alliance will devour it. I've heard that Roaring Flame, the War Riders' commander, is exceptionally strong. Seeing him now, he truly seems powerful. It's no wonder why he dared to reject the Vice Guild leader's recruitment offer. Seeing his strength makes me want to challenge him to a duel. I'd rather duel Black Flame. I want to see if he is as powerful as the rumors make him out to be. Alright, enough. Don't forget our task. As the discussion reached a tipping point, Snow Scar interjected. Everyone on the team immediately shut their mouths. Unlike when the Heavenly Eagle Legion had initially been established, this team was convinced of Snow Scar's strength and followed his leadership obediently. Head to your respective positions and be prepared to act as soon as Zero Wing sends its army out of Zero Wing City. Snow Scar snapped through the team chat. Whether Zero Wing wins or loses, we are going to sever its income source. Understood. The team members then split up and headed toward each of the elemental towers. Once they received the command, they destroy Zero Wing City's 4 towers of elements, the city's greatest income source. Zero Wing. Although our plan is despicable, you only have yourself to blame for standing in Blackwater's way. Snow Scar glanced at the distant Zero Wing residence one final time before heading to his appointed location. While the various major powers were paying close attention to the situation in the Witch's Hill, 1,000 Tier 2 shield warriors and berserkers had gathered in the second-floor hall of Zero Wing's residence. Even now, they didn't know why Shi Feng had called them there, and they couldn't help but discuss the situation amongst themselves. They had only fallen quiet after Shi Feng and Aqua Rose had entered the hall. Since everyone here is a core member of our guild, I'll just come out with it. We want you to fulfill a specific task, but it requires that you convert to the giant race, gaining far greater strength. If you do not wish to convert, you may leave. I'll find a replacement later. If there are no problems, line up before me to complete the conversion, Shi Feng stated after sweeping a glance over the players in the hall. Convert to the giant race? Aqua Rose was stunned when she heard Shi Feng's intentions. She knew a little about race conversion, so she understood the benefits of converting to a neutral race, especially the giants. The giant race had been fathered by the Titans and wielded incredibly strong combat power. The giants were far superior to humans. However, a race conversion wasn't accomplished so easily. The players in the hall remained silent for some time, but once they recovered from their daze, they expressed their shock. They were all core members, so they knew about the benefits of converting to a neutral race, not to mention the legendary giant race. The giants were a mysterious race and even more powerful than beastkin and half-elves. After a moment of processing Shi Feng's offer, they rushed to line up before their guild leader, hoping to be the first to become a giant. Seeing his players' excitement regarding the conversion, Shi Feng retrieved the giant's holy stone and began to change the players before him. After 10 minutes or so, all 1,000 shield warriors and berserkers had become 4-meter-tall giants, and with so many of them, the hall seemed a little crowded. So strong! Aqua Rose exclaimed as she examined the giant players. She could feel an intense pressure radiating from every one of the Tier 2 giants. With all 1,000 in one place, their combined aura was astounding. Good. Let's head to WildhammerTown and pay the Starlight Alliance a visit. Shi Feng nodded approvingly at the 1,000 Tier 2 giants before him. He then activated Spatial Gate, opening a teleportation gate that led to WildhammerTown's area. Chapter 2017 Giant Raid Witch's Hill, WildhammerTown. Due to its proximity to the Million Forest, which made travel to the Otherworld Gate considerably easier, and the investments from multiple corporations, WildhammerTown's player population had grown past 600,000. Player shops filled the town alongside the variety of virtual stores, which were run by real-world corporations. The town was no less prosperous than a minor NPC town. Since the Starlight Alliance was growing stronger, the number of merchant players and adventurer teams visiting the town continued to increase. Sooner or later, WildhammerTown would become the main hub for players wanting to grind in the Million Forest. Although the town had to deal with the occasional monster siege, the Starlight Alliance had solid fortifications. Despite being a basic town, WildhammerTown was surrounded by tall, solid walls, and over a dozen defense turrets and another dozen or so arrow towers had been built along the walls. The Starlight Alliance had also ensured that more than 20,000 players protected the town constantly. With all these defenses, not even the Witch's Hills monsters could cause any damage. Moreover, the guilds that made up the Starlight Alliance had constructed more than a dozen temporary guild residences. Even in the event that the town's defenses failed to repel an enemy invasion, the guilds could easily call in more than 100,000 players as reinforcements at a moment's notice. One could say that WildhammerTown was the safest town in Starmoon Kingdom. As the sun set, the afterglow gradually covered the earth as darkness began to awake from its slumber. Currently, a robust man carrying a silver longbow climbed atop one of WildhammerTown's defense turrets and quietly observed the distant forest. The six-man party that guarded the turret stopped slacking the moment they noticed this man, growing nervous. Although this Tier 2 Ranger was only level 57, an insignificant level in a guild like Knight's Judgment since so many Tier 2 players had already reached level 58 and beyond, the six-man party only had admiration and respect for the man before him. This man was one of the only 6 players in Knight's Judgment that had obtained an advanced legacy. He was also the only expert in the guild to complete the Hell Mode promotion quest. He had been dubbed Soul Chaser in Starmoon Kingdom 8 Feathers. Anyone who had challenged the Tier 2 promotion quest understood how difficult the quest was. A lot of players had to spend a long time preparing for the normal mode promotion quest. Some expert players had even failed their promotion quests after reaching their current levels, still stuck at Tier 1. The Hell Mode promotion quest was practically a legend among players right now, yet 8 Feathers had completed it. Some time ago, the Ranger had sparred with Sin Realm's famous 7 great experts. Although he hadn't defeated any of them, he hadn't lost either. Sin Realm's 7 great experts ranked at the very peak of Purple Thorn's Kingdom's players, but unlike these experts, 8 Feathers was still in his early 20s. He still had plenty of time for growth. The forest seems pretty quiet today. I doubt we'll see any monster sieges, 8 Feathers said, a hint of disappointment flashing in his eyes as he gazed at the forest. The 6 players on duty nodded in approval. They were also disappointed with the lack of activity. Although fending off monster sieges was troublesome, it was an opportunity to obtain treasures and train. The players on duty yesterday were so lucky. They got to participate in a monster siege. Why don't we get to have any fun? I've heard that Commander 8 made a killing yesterday. He even managed to obtain a piece of level 55 secret silver equipment and over 20 primordial crystal fragments. I heard the same. The players on duty also earned 2 or 3 fragments each. They're so lucky. With a few more fragments, they can synthesize them into a full crystal and upgrade their guild mounts to bronze rank. The bronze guild mounts' speed and appearances are to die for. I wonder when I'll get to synthesize my own crystal? There's no need to be in such a hurry. Zero Wing has decided to fight the Starlight Alliance. Once it's defeated, the Witch's Hills resources will be ours for the taking. Obtaining a primordial crystal will be a piece of cake. I guess you're right. But isn't Zero Wing full of itself? Just because it is Starmoon Kingdom's #1 guild, it is taking us lightly. Doesn't the guild realize that we've entered a new era? Tier 2 players have already become commonplace. With how few Tier 2 experts Zero Wing has, how could it suppress the dozen or so guilds in the Starlight Alliance? When the plays atop the defense turret spoke about Zero Wing, they could not help but laugh at and ridicule the guild's ignorance. Even now, it tried to cling to its past achievements. However, as these players began to discuss where they should go to grind for primordial crystal fragments, a spatial tear suddenly opened near the town's main entrance, adding a bizarre effect to the reddening sky. The spatial tear continued to grow until it formed a black hole. Once the black hole had stabilized, a figure emerged and stepped onto WildhammerTown's main street. A monster siege. Watching from the defense turrets, the players on duty didn't have a clear view of the figure. They could only see the invader's enormous framer. This invader was far larger than the players wandering the streets, so the watching players assumed that it must be a monster. No. That marker. That guy's a player. 8 Feathers, who had incredible sight, exclaimed as he shook his head, his expression grim. The invader was 4 meters tall and radiated an aura resembling that of a wild beast. No matter how he considered the situation, this invader would be difficult to deal with. Moreover, the invading player was level 60, which only peak experts had reached at this stage of the game. This only solidified the idea that this player wasn't to be trifled with. Shortly after the first giant appeared, more began to emerge from the black hole. In a brief moment, several dozen giant players graced WildhammerTown streets. Most importantly, these giant players wore the 6-winged emblem of Zero Wing. Zero Wing's members dare to trespass in our WildhammerTown. Are they that tired of living? Commander, let's blast them to smithereens. No matter how powerful players were, they were still players. Against the defense turrets they were little more than cannon fodder. The fact that Zero Wing's members had grown larger only made them easier targets. The defense turret's AoE is too large. There are other players on the street. With so few of them, the NPC soldiers and patrol squads can deal with them easily enough. 8 Feathers said. The defense turret's attacks did not differentiate between friend and foe. If they accidentally bombarded bystanders, it would be very bad for the town's reputation. Rather than using the defense turrets, it was wiser to let the several thousand NPC soldiers and 20,000 player guards deal with these intruders. Furthermore, Zero Wing had only arrived with several dozen members. They didn't need to employ the defense turrets for such a small force. However, when one of Knight's Judgment's patrol squads reached Zero Wing's giant players, one of Zero Wing's massive members executed a Tier 1 whirlwind slash with his battle axe. The impact threw 10 or so players from the 100-man team over a dozen yards away. The squad's Tier 2 players remained standing, but for Tier 1 players, only those that wore plate armor had survived the attack. The rest had died instantly, their bodies transforming into streaks of light before disappearing. Chapter 2018 Battle at Wildhammer. Due to the frightening power the axe-wielding giant player had just displayed, the bystanders on the street had fallen silent. When they looked at the shattered ground beneath the giant player's feet, they could not help but grow nervous. So strong. Zero Wing isn't seriously attacking WildhammerTown, is it? Has Zero Wing gone insane? It actually dares to attack WildhammerTown directly? If they had been confused about why such a small group from Zero Wing had appeared in WildhammerTown, they weren't now. Zero Wing intended to strike out against the Starlight Alliance, and it would use WildhammerTown to do it, the Alliance's most important base. Just as the surrounding crowd whispered among themselves, Zero Wing's Tier 2 giant players annihilated the first 100-man patrol squad that had greeted them. Even Knight's Judgment's Tier 2 players fell helplessly before the giant berserkers. After witnessing the giant players' combat power, the bystanders fled the scene, only daring to watch the battle from a long, safe distance. Commander, the bystanders have left the battlefield. Should we open fire? One of the players on duty at the defense turret turned to 8 Feathers, asking for confirmation. Zero Wing's giant players had displayed far greater combat power than they had expected. The patrol squad had consisted of 100 elite and expert players from Knight's Judgment, yet these several dozen intruders had wiped out the squad in less than 10 seconds. The giant players' mighty strength had carved out numerous craters on the town's main street. If these players were allowed to wreak havoc, WildhammerTown would suffer significant damage. Sure enough, Zero Wing has come prepared. Open fire. Annihilate them before they leave that street. We cannot let them cause damage to the rest of the town. 8 Feathers commanded through the team chat. Even he felt slightly threatened as he watched Zero Wing's giant players. If they were allowed to destroy the town and kill these players, the consequences would be unimaginable. Understood. Upon hearing 8 Feathers' command, the players manning the town's defense turrets went into action. Very quickly, over a dozen defense turrets turned and fired upon the giant players simultaneously. A series of explosions rang out from the defense turrets. With the turrets' range and AoE attacks, Zero Wing's members had no hope of escaping the blast radius in time. However, a dozen or so Tier 2 shield warriors among the giant players suddenly stepped forward and raised their shields, receiving the cannon shells. Boom, boom, boom. The cannon shells exploded as they collided with the shields, and the resulting shockwaves were so intense that even the players some distance away could feel them. However, once the dust settled, the revealed scene stupefied the watching players. Not only had the giant shield warriors survived the attacks, but they also remained in their original positions. Not one of them had taken a single step back. Moreover, the shield warriors hadn't even lost 10% of their HPs. How high is their defense? Those were Tier 3 attacks. The players manning the defense turrets stared at the barely injured intruders in astonishment. The defense turret's cannon shells could even deal over -300,000 damage to Tier 3 NPCs. The attacks would kill players instantly if they landed. A Tier 2 shield warrior with both a berserk skill and a life-saving skill might survive, but only barely. However, the giant players had taken almost no damage after receiving the defense turret's attacks. They would look as good as new if they simply dusted off their armor. "Commander, what should we do?" the players manning the defense turrets asked 8 Feathers desperately. "Prepare to fire another round. Once the cooldown ends, fire." Even 8 Feathers watched Zero Wing's giant players with a grim expression. Finishing them off would take quite some time with how high these giants' defense and strength were. Meanwhile, these dozen or so giant players would wreak havoc in WildhammerTown. The moment 8 Feathers finished issuing his command, he caught sight of more giant players emerging from the black hole. He was so shocked that his mind froze momentarily. But contrary to his expectations, these giant players didn't start a rampant slaughter. After exiting the black hole, the new arrivals guarded their position alongside the first group of giants. "Quick! Notify the guild leader. Request reinforcements to WildhammerTown immediately." 8 Feathers barked as a foreboding feeling overwhelmed him. When one normally launched a surprise attack on an opponent's town, they'd do their best to avoid the town's defenses and cause as much destruction as possible. After all, the defense turrets and arrow towers' power was no laughing matter, and every guild town had plenty of NPC soldiers for security. Once the invaders were surrounded, they'd be doomed. However, Zero Wing's giant players showed no intention of doing so. They simply stood on the main street and wasted time as they fell into a defensive formation. No matter how one looked at the situation, their behavior seemed foolish. The more time Zero Wing wasted, the more of an advantage the town's defenders would have. But was Zero Wing truly that foolish? As 8 Feathers watched more giant players gather on the main street, his hands began to tremble. However, he didn't tremble with excitement, but because he had considered a possibility. His enemy didn't care about advantages or disadvantages. Zero Wing had full confidence in its ability to capture WildhammerTown. The players manning the defense turret felt that 8 Feathers was making a mountain of a molehill. The intruders were merely a small group of giant players, not a 1 million strong army. Did they really need every guild in the Starlight Alliance to send reinforcements? However, despite their opinions, they followed the Rangers' orders and contacted their guild leader, letting him decide what should be done. After a short moment, 1,000 giant players had gathered in WildhammerTown. The crowd's breathing grew heavy as they watched the invaders. A single giant player could easily negate a defense turret's attack, and 1,000 of these monstrous players now stood in the middle of their town. Tension shot through the town's independent players and those from Knight's Judgment. When everyone began to assume that nothing else would emerge from the black hole, a figure, which was considerably smaller than the giant players, appeared. When they saw this figure, both the independent players and Knight's Judgment's members grew even more nervous. Black Flame? Black Flame is leading the attack himself. Everyone in Starmoon Kingdom knew the name Black Flame. He was a legendary existence that had the power to stand against a Tier 4 mythic monster by himself for a short time. Even now, everyone could easily recall his achievements. Guild leader Black Flame, you actually decided to visit WildhammerTown personally? This is truly surprising. To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit? 8 Feathers asked, deliberately dragging his words to buy time. Relying on a bunch of defense turrets and NPC soldiers wouldn't be nearly enough against an expert with mythic-level combat power. They needed to use their guild's trump card, but activating it required time. Since the Starlight Alliance has declared war on Zero Wing, we are here to issue our response and wipe the Starlight Alliance from Starmoon Kingdom's map. Shurfeng responded, his tone casual. It was as if he knew that 8 Feathers was trying to buy time and didn't mind at all. Do you think that's really possible with just 1,000 players? Glancing at the time, 8 Feathers grinned and shouted, activate the magic array. Suddenly, a gigantic magic array manifested, enveloping the main street and several adjacent streets. The intruding expert's basic attributes plummeted as the powerful pressure from the array washed over them. This was WildhammerTown's trump card _ a large-scale intermediate magic array that could even survive against a mythic monster's attacks for a considerable amount of time. The enemy players caught within the array would lose at least 20% of their basic attributes. Why not? Feng responded by activating Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance. Chapter 2019 E-Destruction of Wildhammer. The instant Feng activated Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance, a silver ripple spread out from him. When the silver ripple passed through the non-zero wing members, their bodies immediately felt heavier as their basic attributes decreased. Even their reaction speeds had become slightly sluggish. Meanwhile, this silver ripple quickly engulfed the entire Wildhammer town. What's going on? Why can't I contact the outside world? When the ripple stopped expanding and disappeared, a translucent barrier enveloped the entire Wildhammer town. Some of the players inside the town quickly discovered that communications with the outside world had been completely cut off. They couldn't even access Star Moon Kingdom's official forums. The Starlight Alliance members present in the town started panicking. Not only were their basic attributes and physique heavily suppressed, but they were also rendered incommunicado. They naturally wouldn't be able to ask for reinforcements and could only deal with the 1,000 giant players, who suddenly had their attributes enhanced, all by themselves. They were already at an absolute disadvantage even when fighting against the giants in their normal state. Now that the gap in attributes had been further widened. Alright, I won't mind if anyone else inside the town wishes to help the Starlight Alliance. Now let's start a delightful fight. Feng said as he swept a glance at the various independent players and adventurer teams, who were showing hints of wanting to take action. Although Feng did not speak that loudly, it would be hard for everyone not to hear him as the street was deathly silent right now. The various independent players and adventurer team members involuntarily avoided his gaze, their eyes wide with fear. Amazing. With just a few words, black flames scared the players that were planning to take advantage of the situation into inaction. Of course. After seeing all the cards Zero Wing has revealed thus far, in addition to hearing Black Flame's calm tone, who would dare make an enemy out of Zero Wing now? As expected of Zero Wing's guild leader. With his charisma and intelligence, the Starlight Alliance will definitely have their hands full dealing with Zero Wing. With this, the Starlight Alliance will most likely have a difficult time getting the players inside the town to help out. When the upper echelon of the various guilds that were not part of the Starlight Alliance saw this scene, they felt great admiration for Feng. At the same time, their wariness of Zero Wing also further increased. At this moment, 8 Feathers, who had reached the battlefield, waved his hand. Immediately, several players hidden along the street took out Tier 3 large-scale destruction magic scrolls and aimed the scrolls at Feng. In the next moment, gigantic magic arrays bloomed above the main street, one after another. Black Flame. Pay for your arrogance. 8 Feathers shouted as he glared at Feng and the other members of Zero Wing. Attack. 9 Tier 3 large-scale destruction spells activated simultaneously, the AoE of the spells covering the entire main street. The power of the spells was much greater than the attacks of the defense turrets. Shields also wouldn't be effective against these spells. MTs could only endure them. Even if the giant shield warriors activated their life-saving skills and survived this combined attack, they would most likely have very little HP remaining. As for Feng, even if the swordsman was more amazing, he would not be able to kill the 9 players activating the 9 magic scrolls within the scroll's short activation time. The 9 gigantic magic arrays in the sky immediately released a blinding glow and started rapidly sucking up the mana available in WildhammerTown's main street. However, even after seeing that the 9 Tier 3 large-scale destruction spells were about to activate, Feng still showed no intention of dodging. Instead, he merely waved his hand casually. Forbidden Domain. A gray ripple spread out from Feng and shattered the magic arrays in the sky, allowing the rampaging mana to calm down. Following which, the 9 large-scale destruction spells vanished without accomplishing anything. What? Why does he have a large-scale silencing domain? 8 Feathers' eyes widened as he checked the 9 players responsible for activating the large-scale destruction magic scrolls. At this moment, the magic scrolls these players previously wielded had already disappeared. This situation was clearly the effect of the silence debuff. The silence debuff made attacks using skills and spells impossible. If they were to fight inside this silencing domain's AoE, they would be in an extremely disadvantageous position. Now their only way to repulse Zero Wing's members was by utilizing the defense turrets and arrow towers. Although these defensive structures would have little to no effect against Zero Wing's giant players, these defensive structures could still buy them time to escape the silencing domain's AoE. Just as 8 Feathers was about to have the defense turrets and arrow towers bombard the main street, a clear and crisp voice suddenly entered his ears. "Now that you're done attacking, it's my turn now. Hopefully this spell will be to your satisfaction," Shifeng said as he pointed a finger to the sky. Flame Domain. Immediately after, 8 Feathers saw a massive crimson magic array appear overhead, covering nearly half of the entire main street. Not good. At this moment, the magic array encompassed every Starlight Alliance member on the main street before 8 Feathers could order a retreat. However, a column of flames descended from the magic array, the flames visible to all the players in WildhammerTown. The ground within the AoE of Flame Domain instantly turned into lava. Meanwhile, even the level 80 Tier 2 NPCs didn't survive, dying and turning into ashes after getting caught within the fiery hell for a few seconds. After the column of flames disappeared, the scene that appeared had all the onlookers gasping involuntarily. Several thousand players and a few hundred NPC soldiers had disappeared just like that. Now, nearly half of the main street was void of life, with plenty of player items strewn across the street. Most importantly, the players killed by the column of flames were the main fighting force of the Starlight Alliance. This loss was much more severe than if the Starlight Alliance had lost several tens of thousands of Tier 1 elite members. After all, while Tier 1 and Tier 2 experts were somewhat capable of hindering Zero Wing's giant players, Tier 1 elite players were practically cannon fodder in front of the Tier 2 giant players. As for Shifeng, after seeing that he had torn a hole in the enemy encirclement, he commanded, "Everyone advance. Our target is Knight's Judgment's residence." A part of the reason why capturing a town or city was considered difficult was the external defenses. Enemies would have a difficult time breaking into the town or city. However, unlike cities, towns did not have defensive magic arrays to prevent enemies from teleporting directly into the town via a skill or tool. In a situation where the defense turrets and arrow towers were ineffective, the only trouble they would face was the Tier 2 players and NPC soldiers garrisoning the town. Previously, the Starlight Alliance's Tier 2 players and NPC soldiers had a considerable numerical advantage. However, after the blast from Flame Domain, that advantage had diminished. Moreover, Miniature World was also suppressing the surviving players and NPCs. Hence, Shifeng was no longer worried about facing any problems and commanded his team to head straight for their target. After Shifeng gave the command, the 1,000 giant players promptly charged toward Knight's Judgment's guild residence. The Tier 2 giant berserkers in front easily tore through the Starlight Alliance's defensive lines. The Starlight Alliance's members could not even slow Zero Wing's advance. Only the Tier 2 experts that had activated their berserk skills could contend against the giants. However, Zero Wing's giant players also possessed berserk skills. Like rampaging wild beasts, the several Tier 2 giant berserkers who had activated Power of Darkness were capable of killing over a dozen players with a single attack. Even the level 80 Tier 2 NPCs received a one-sided beating when going up against them. Presented with this scene, the spectating independent players did not dare to leave their current positions, deeply afraid of attracting the attention of these violent giant players. As for the adventurer teams and members of small guilds that were previously planning to take advantage of the situation to attack Zero Wing, they had given up entirely on their thoughts. They also celebrated the fact that they had not hastily taken action. Before the players inside WildhammerTown could recover from their shock, Zero Wing's giant players had already charged into Knight's Judgment's heavily fortified residence, destroyed the guild flag located on the first underground floor, and obtained WildhammerTown's town order. With this, the Starlight Alliance had lost all control over WildhammerTown. Chapter 2020 Great Changes Starmoon Kingdom, Witch's Hill. Due to indications that Zero Wing would take action, many of the Starlight Alliance's members had gathered a short distance away from Zero Wing City and were grinding there, thoroughly sealing off the paths leading from the city, while quietly awaiting Zero Wing's next move. However, standing atop a hill a short distance away from Zero Wing City, Shadowlight Axe, the guild leader of Knight's Judgment, was currently confused and agitated. Just a short while ago, he had suddenly received news that Knight's Judgment had lost control over WildhammerTown. Moreover, this was directly announced into the ears of every guild member of Knight's Judgment. Guild System: Zero Wing has captured WildhammerTown's town order. WildhammerTown will no longer be under Knight's Judgment's jurisdiction. Guild popularity reduced by 2,000. Although Shifeng's miniature world sealed off the communications of players caught within the skill's AoE, it could not prevent the release of the notification of the guild town's capture. As long as one was a member of Knight's Judgment, they would immediately receive news of WildhammerTown's capture. This could be considered a morale punishment toward a guild that failed to defend its town. WildhammerTown got captured? How is this possible? What did Zero Wing do? The sudden notification threw Knight's Judgment's members for a loop. WildhammerTown was a town their guild had fortified heavily. Just the players garrisoning the town numbered over 20,000. There were also more than 24 static defenses built in the town, as well as thousands of NPC soldiers. Most importantly, Knight's Judgment had invested a lot of money into building a sturdy wall, which encompassed the entire town and prevented players from vaulting over it. The only way to get into the town was by destroying the wall. However, doing so would be extremely difficult. Even 100 Tier 2 players targeting a single section of the wall would need to launch numerous attacks to reduce the wall's durability by just 1 point. Even if Zero Wing's members had war weapons like cannons, they should still take quite some time to breach the wall. Hence, Knight's Judgment's members found it truly hard to imagine that such a WE11 fortified town could actually be captured, and within only a short time. At this moment, confusion plagued the entire Knight's Judgment. Even Shadowlight Axe, who had experienced countless trials and tribulations, wore an ashen complexion, a cold glint flashing across his eyes. Guild leader, let's rush back to WildhammerTown now. We can't let Zero Wing get away with this so easily. A level 59, Tier 2 male cleric urged anxiously. Even if a guild town's town order were snatched, the town would not immediately switch owners. The ruling guild would simply lose control of the town. If the ruling guild could snatch the town order back within an hour, the town would promptly return to the ruling guild's control. No, we're out of time for that, Shadowlight Axe said as he shook his head in frustration. What we need to do now is head immediately to Warring Empire's Golden Flow town. Also, look into how Zero Wing managed to capture WildhammerTown. Afterward, we'll discuss with the rest of the Alliance how we should proceed. Nowadays, WildhammerTown was Knight's Judgment's main support. It was precisely because of WildhammerTown's existence that Knight's Judgment received a large amount of funding, gaining an advantage over the other major powers. Without WildhammerTown, Knight's Judgment's position would plummet into oblivion. If it were possible to take back WildhammerTown's town order, he too wished to do so. However, Knight's Judgment's main army was currently far from WildhammerTown. With their ability to teleport to the town robbed, they would need over an hour to reach WildhammerTown even if they took the shortest route and traveled non-stop by mount. Not to mention there were also plenty of high-level monsters on the way there. Understood. I'll contact the other guilds of the Alliance. The male cleric had no choice but to nod in agreement with Shadowlight Axe's words. Although he felt unreconciled to simply letting Zero Wing gain WildhammerTown, he was helpless. Meanwhile, news of Zero Wing capturing WildhammerTown spread like wildfire across the entire Starmoon Kingdom. After all, the matter of a guild town falling was staggering news that could not be kept a secret, not to mention. The various large guilds and adventurer teams of Starmoon Kingdom were all paying close attention to the situation at the Witch's Hill. Are you kidding me? That WildhammerTown actually fell to Zero Wing? What did Zero Wing do? Could this information be fake? When the players of Starmoon Kingdom found out about this matter, their first reaction was denial. After all, how could such a well-fortified town fall so easily? Moreover, Zero Wing had captured the town so quickly that almost no news about it had leaked beforehand. The only thing everyone knew before this was that Zero Wing had suddenly gathered 1,000 Tier 2 experts. However, what could 1,000 Tier 2 experts possibly do against a guild town? It would be sheer suicide to attack a guild town with such a small force. Just the NPC soldiers inside the town would be more than enough to kill these experts. Meanwhile, the news of Zero Wing suddenly capturing WildhammerTown sent the ferment in Starmoon Kingdom into an immediate and rapid cooldown. The various major powers automatically took a step back and started observing the situation more carefully. After all, if Zero Wing was capable of capturing even a WH-fortified town like WildhammerTown, then it was definitely more than capable of capturing the guild towns of smaller guilds like theirs. I really underestimated Zero Wing. To think it would capture WildhammerTown so quickly. No wonder Zero Wing dares to resist Blackwater. Snow Scar, who currently stood inside one of the 4 Towers of Elements, was surprised to receive news about this sudden development. Commander, are we going to give up on destroying the 4 Towers of Elements, then? A level 60 Tier 2 assassin asked in a quiet tone. Let's wait a little while longer and see what actions the Starlight Alliance takes. The Alliance has suffered a considerable setback with the loss of WildhammerTown. It definitely won't be able to sit still and do nothing. It will take some sort of action. And when it does, we'll have our opportunity, Snowscar replied, chuckling. The main reason why the Starlight Alliance was able to develop so rapidly in the Witch's Hill was the 2 guild towns it controlled. Now that the number of guild towns it controlled had been halved, if the Alliance still refused to take action, there would be only one outcome. The resources available in a single town wouldn't be enough for so many corporations to share. It also wouldn't be enough for the various member guilds of the Alliance. At that time, some corporations and guilds would choose to withdraw from the Alliance. Eventually, the Starlight Alliance would naturally disappear from Starmoon Kingdom. Snow Scar had to admit that Zero Wing was truly vicious to deal such a fatal blow to the Starlight Alliance. Of course, achieving what Zero Wing achieved was also extremely difficult to begin with. Witch's Hill Golden Flow Town. Due to WildhammerTown's capture, the entire Starlight Alliance was currently in chaos. After receiving a call from Shadowlight Axe, the representatives of every member guild had gathered in Warring Empire's residence to hold an emergency meeting. Zero Wing is truly ruthless. With this single move, it silenced the entire kingdom. As things stand, we'll have a much more difficult time locking down the Million Forest, Wind Cloud, Sin Realm's representative and a Tier 2 assassin, said. Turning to Shadowlight Axe, he smiled and asked, "Do you have any thoughts on this or any information to report? Don't tell me you still haven't found out a single thing about what happened in WildhammerTown even now." Aside from being one of Sin Realm's 7 great experts, Wind Cloud was also the most famous assassin in the Purple Thorns Kingdom. Many experts and guild leaders of first-rate guilds had fallen at his hands before he joined Sin Realm. Only after suffering defeat at Lone Beacon's hands did he join Sin Realm. My side has already received a report on what happened in WildhammerTown. According to the report, Zero Wing raided WildhammerTown suddenly by means of teleportation. Although only 1,000 people were teleported into the town, these 1,000 people were no ordinary players. They were all 4 meters tall and possessed extraordinary strength and defense. They could contend against level 80, Tier 2 NPCs head-on and survive the attacks of defense turrets without receiving much damage, Shadowlight Axe said. He also did not forget to show the battle videos recorded. So, the equivalent of 1,000 monster players? Roaring Flame War Rider's commander said, frowning. What frightening combat power. If the fight occurs in a narrow place like the street of a town, they will indeed be very difficult to deal with. Roaring Flame frequently fought large-scale battles, so he understood very clearly how powerful these 1,000 giant players would be in an urban battle. Battles inside of towns were different from battles out in the fields. Executing large-scale battle formations was extremely difficult inside a town. Rather, units of several hundred or several thousand players would be more suitable in such a situation. We have too little information. We have never before heard about any of the cards Zero Wing has just shown. If we had, Zero Wing never would have succeeded. Shadowlight Axe exclaimed. That's right. However, what we need to do now is take back WildhammerTown. Although Zero Wing has these giant players, we have monster players on our side. Moreover, we outnumber Zero Wing considerably. The only problem is that domain skill Black Flame used. Its suppression effect is simply too powerful. If we have some way to resist it, the problem would be solved much more easily, Skyview, Warring Empire's guild leader, said as he nodded in agreement with Shadowlight Axe's words. Dealing with the giant players was not a problem. After all, their side had monster players. According to the information they received, the combat power of their monster players should be equal to that of Zero Wing's giant players. No need to worry about this. I have a tool here that has a powerful suppression force, although the cost of activating it is very high. This tool can also summon powerful monsters. Although it can't summon a lot of monsters, their quality is top-notch. They are much more powerful than even the evil beasts found in Ancient Rock City. In the past, when Zero Wing launched a large-scale attack against Ancient Rock City, it could only retreat in defeat when faced with those evil beasts. With these summoned monsters, we should not have any problem retaking WildhammerTown, Wind Cloud said, smiling. We'll have to depend on Brother Wind afterward then. Shadowlight Axe breathed out a sigh of relief. WildhammerTown's defenses were far from being a match for ancient rock cities. It also didn't have a defensive magic array protecting it. Although Wind Cloud wouldn't be able to summon many monsters, if they included the support of a large number of monster players, retaking WildhammerTown should be feasible. After all, Zero Wing lacked numbers. However, just as the gathered representatives were about to discuss further how they should retake WildhammerTown, a person suddenly barged into the room with a panicked expression. When this person entered, everyone inside the room could hear quite the commotion coming from outside. What's going on outside? Why is it so noisy? Don't they know that we're holding an important meeting? Skyview demanded of the guild member that barged in. Guild leader. Not good. Outside. A large number of giant players have suddenly appeared outside. The level 57 berserker reported while panting. Chapter 2021, Sudden Appearance in Golden Flow Town. After the jittery berserker reported what was happening outside the residence, the entire meeting room fell silent. How is this possible? Why would Zero Wing's members be here? Didn't they just capture WildhammerTown? Are you sure you saw correctly? This sudden development stupefied everyone inside the meeting room. Their minds simply could not process this turn of events. Even though the reporting berserker had already explained things clearly, they still found an attack on Golden Flow Town inconceivable. Zero Wing had just fought a battle in WildhammerTown. No matter how powerful Zero Wing's giant players were, they would definitely have suffered some losses. Meanwhile, only a little over 2 hours had passed since Zero Wing captured WildhammerTown. Logically, Zero Wing should be prioritizing taking over of WildhammerTown instead of launching another attack. Zero Wing's unconventional way of doing things messed up their original plans. We haven't even gone to reclaim WildhammerTown, yet Zero Wing is already knocking on our doors? Wind Cloud revealed a playful smile at this situation. Zero Wing is too arrogant. As soon as it captured WildhammerTown, it is trying to take Golden Flow Town? Is Zero Wing planning on annihilating the Starlight Alliance in one fell swoop? Shadowlight Axe, on the other hand, revealed a dark expression. In his opinion, the main reason why Zero Wing was able to capture WildhammerTown before was the Starlight Alliance's ignorance of the existence of the giant players and of Zero Wing's ability to teleport 1,000 players directly into a town. Had the Alliance known about these things and prepared beforehand, Zero Wing wouldn't have been able to take down WildhammerTown at all. Zero Wing most likely doesn't know that we have already gathered our combat power in Golden Flow Town and is launching a preemptive strike, Skyview said, frowning as a hint of rage flashed across his eyes. Hurriedly, he turned to the reporting berserker and ordered, "Relay my commands. Have every expert in the guild gather in Golden Flow Town. I want Zero Wing's visit here to be a one-way trip. However, it is best if we proceed with caution. We should not take Black Flame lightly. He might have some traps set up for us," Wind Cloud cautioned. WildhammerTown and Golden Flow Town served as the Starlight Alliance's foundation. Even the loss of one could push the Alliance to the brink of annihilation. If both towns were lost, the Starlight Alliance would be done for. Hence, they needed to be extra careful in this upcoming battle. This is certain. I will have everyone in Star Moon Kingdom understand that Zero Wing is already old news. The future Star Moon Kingdom will belong to the Starlight Alliance. Skyview said, sneering. Gather every monster player inside the town. Prepare all the war weapons and magic scrolls we have. Let's go and meet Zero Wing. Let's hope that's the case, Wind Cloud muttered in exasperation. He felt that Skyview wasn't listening to him at all. However, he also had to admit that the current Golden Flow Town was quite unlike the lightly defended WildhammerTown of before, what with the Starlight Alliance's upper echelon, experts, and elites all gathered here. Afterward, the Starlight Alliance's upper echelon went into action, ordering their guild experts to gather at Golden Flow Town. At the same time, they also had their subordinates who were already in town, form an encirclement around Zero Wing's giant players, to prevent Zero Wing from wreaking havoc on the town. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's 1,000 giant players were already engaged in battle all over Golden Flow Town. Due to the effects of Miniature World and Ring of Brilliance, the Starlight Alliance's members and NPC soldiers were at a total disadvantage. Giants sent players flying all around. Craters pocked the various streets. Rather than a battle between players, this scene looked more like a monster siege instead. The The independent players inside the town could not help but be stunned upon seeing this scene. The strength and defense that Zero Wing's giant players possessed were absurd. The town's level 80 NPC soldiers were simply a joke before these giants. However, under the commands of the Starlight Alliance's upper echelon, a defensive encirclement quickly formed around Zero Wing's members. Multiple teams led by Tier 2 experts started using magic arrays to suppress the giant players and then engage these giant players in battle. Among the various teams, the ones led by guild upper echelons possessed the greatest strength. Not only were these teams composed entirely of Tier 2 players, but every team member was also an expert that was capable of reaching the late stage of the Trial Tower's 5th floor at the very least. Due to the assistance of magic barriers, these experts could cooperate with each other to take advantage of the giant players' slow movement speed and reaction speed. Each expert team could go up against several giant players at a time. The teams led by the Starlight Alliance's 4 strongest powers performed even more fiercely. Wielding a flaming, magic staff, Skyview, Warring Empire's guild leader, released one fire-type spell after another, the power of each spell rivaling that of Tier 3 spells. Moreover, his attacks were extremely fast, a perfect counter to the slow giant players. All by himself, Skyview managed to deplete a Tier 2 giant player's HP in just a dozen seconds or so. After battling for around 3 minutes, Skyview's 100-man team killed a giant team made up of a dozen or so giant players. Skyview then led his team to patch up the holes that had formed in the defensive encirclement, preventing other giant teams from advancing. However, although the Starlight Alliance's upper echelon teams performed well against the giant players, their efforts were negligible, as they could cover only so much ground at a time. The corpses of the Starlight Alliance's members filled many other locations in the town. Zero Wing. Skyview's complexion turned very ugly as he looked at the corpses of his guildmates strewn across the street he stood on. In the name of the Warring Empire, I definitely will not let any of you leave this place alive. This situation was simply horrible. Every Warring Empire member currently fighting in the town was an elite player at the very minimum. Among them, many were even expert players. These players were the mainstays of the guild. With so many of these elite and expert players dying, Warring Empire would need a very long time to recover afterward. At this moment, the other guild upper echelons were also experiencing the might of the giant players and Shifeng's miniature world. This situation was indeed outside of their expectations. Brother Wind, are you still not ready? Skyview asked through a call with Wind Cloud. It's done. Wind Cloud, who was currently holding a ceremony in Warring Empire's residence, replied, smiling. As soon as Wind Cloud said so, the sky above Golden Flow Town suddenly darkened. At the same time, the 5,000 level 50+ players taking part in the ceremony in the residence disintegrated instantly, their bodies transforming into pitch-black smoke that gathered in the sky. Afterward, the smoke started descending in streams, one after another. Upon reaching the ground, each stream of smoke took on a humanoid shape. Even the weakest among these humanoid gas lifeforms was a level 70 Great Lord, with several among them being level 70+ Grand Lords. These gas lifeforms easily numbered in the hundreds. Moreover, the eyes of every one of these smoke monsters shone with intelligence. In addition to the appearance of these smoke monsters, the suppression effect of Miniature World also vanished without a trace. This move was none other than Sin Realm's strongest trump card, Death's Praise. It was a super rare epic item that could be used only once every 10 days. This move from Sin Realm is amazing. The smoke monster's astonished roaring flame, who was commanding the members of the War Riders. Even an army of 3,000 Tier 2 players would most likely fall if attacked by so many of these smoke monsters. Good. Everyone tighten the encirclement and kill every giant player in sight. Skyview commanded. Without the suppression of Miniature World, even the Great Lord-ranked smoke monsters would be able to go toe-to-toe against the giant players. As for the Grand Lords, they possessed combat power superior to the giant players, and there were more than 50 of these Grand Lords. After just a short moment, Zero Wing's giant players started getting pushed back. Now, these giant players no longer dared to operate in parties or small teams, as they would be killed off easily if they did so. Zero Wing sure is gullible. Does it really think it can take down Golden Flow Town as easily as it did WildhammerTown, using just 1,000 players? Since Zero Wing dares to look down on our Starlight Alliance, we should teach Zero Wing's members the consequences of overreaching. I'm really looking forward to the expression of regret Black Flame is going to make. After this battle, I'll definitely compile a close-up video of this battle and post it onto the official forums for him. While the Starlight Alliance's upper echelons were merrily chatting among themselves, the Starlight Alliance's army cornered Zero Wings forces at the town's central plaza. At this moment, only a little over 700 giant players stood in the central plaza. Standing among these giant players was a cloaked man carrying 2 exquisite longswords at his waist. The cloaked man was currently observing the situation with a calm gaze. Meanwhile, this cloaked man was none other than Black Flame, a person everyone in Starmoon Kingdom was familiar with. Guild leader Black Flame. I'm sure you never thought that such a day would come for you, right? Skyview said excitedly as he looked at Shifeng. Unfortunately, it is too late for regrets. Everyone charge. Let Guild leader Black Flame know how laughable his arrogance is. Chapter 2022, True Slaughter. As soon as Skyview gave the command, the monster players and Tier 2 experts under his lead charged toward the central plaza. Black Flame. Surrender your life. Once Skyview was within 50 yards of Shifeng, he activated his Berserk skill, and the surrounding mana surged toward him. His aura intensified until it was no weaker than the monster players around him. He then pointed his staff at Shifeng. Small, crimson magic arrays began to surround Shifeng. Spears of raging fire then flew from the arrays, one after another. Tier 2 Curse, Violent Flame Spears. This curse was normally as powerful as a Tier 3 attack, and with the effects of Skyview's special Berserk skill, it had grown even more powerful. Now, each flame spear had the power to rival an attack from a Grand Lord of the same level. Even a Tier 2 metric tons with active Berserk and life-saving skills would die instantly if they faced 28 flame spears from multiple directions. However, Shifeng effortlessly deflected the spears with his swords. Moreover, he had done so without moving. In the end, every flame spear had brushed past him and crashed into the ground without accomplishing anything. Seeing that his first attack had failed, Skyview promptly cast his second ultimate move, the Tier 2 Curse, Flaming Fangs. Although Flaming Fangs only consisted of 5 attacks, far fewer than Violent Flame Spears, Skyview had full control of all 5. In comparison, he could only aim the Violent Flame Spears when he activated the spell. Once the spell launched the attacks, the spears' trajectories couldn't be altered. The 5 Flaming Fangs circled Shifeng like a crimson ring around him. With how fast the Flaming Fangs moved, guessing where and when they'd strike was almost impossible. Die. Once he found an opportunity, Skyview swung his staff. The 5 Flaming Fangs flew toward Shifeng's blind spots, altering their trajectories multiple times as they approached. Boom, boom, boom. A round of explosions shook the battlefield, but Skyview didn't express joy even after releasing his attacks. He had practiced Flaming Fangs tirelessly to master the spell. He had even created a basic combat technique of his own to amplify the spell's effectiveness, yet the galaxy of stars that had manifested around Shifeng had rendered all 5 Flaming Fangs useless. It was as if all of the effort he had invested was in vain. Guild leader Sky will help you. Shadowlight Axe ran towards Skyview alongside a dozen or so monster players. No. Wait. Skyview yelled at Shadowlight Axe to stop as he watched Shifeng, who remained unharmed. With the experience of countless life-or-death battles in God's domain, Skyview had honed his instincts to an extraordinary level. He was particularly sensitive to the threat of death and danger. After his brief clash with Shifeng, he knew that the man wasn't as simple as rumors had made him seem. His Flaming Fangs attacks had the strength of a Grand Lord of the same level, yet Shifeng had blocked all 5 of without any skills. The man had simply relied on his own strength. Shifeng's strength definitely shouldn't be underestimated. With a single mistake they could all die in an instant. If they wanted to contend with a player of such strength, they would need multiple Great Lord-ranked monster players or the Starlight Alliance's peak experts with active Berserk skills. However, only one of the dozen or so monster players accompanying Shadowlight Axe was at the Great Lord standard. Based on Shifeng's serene performance, the 3 of them wouldn't be enough to take the swordsman down. Furthermore, Shifeng hadn't activated a Berserk skill. Skyview realized that he'd need many more people to defeat this man. He's already honed his instincts to such a beast-like level? Shifeng flashed Skyview a surprised look as the man kept his distance. While Skyview and Shadowlight Axe watched Shifeng warily, Roaring Flame and Wind Cloud had arrived with their respective teams. Black Flame. We've sealed off all paths out of this plaza. You and your guild members have no hope of escape. Wind Cloud shouted, smiling faintly at Shifeng. The town only had 6 paths that led to the central plaza, and the Starlight Alliance's monster players had blocked all 6. Moreover, they had used a spatial seal to lock down Golden Flow Town, preventing players from using teleportation skills or tools. Not even Tier 3 instantaneous movement magic scrolls would be effective within the seal. Now all they had to do was eliminate Shifeng and his giant players. The seal's complete already? Skyview could not help his grin after hearing Wind Cloud's declaration. Guild leader Black Flame, it would seem that today you will finally fall. Are you going to hand your life over obediently? Or should we take our time with killing you? Make your choice. If Shifeng's giant players had any hope of fleeing Golden Flow Town before, the Starlight Alliance's players had dashed it. Now that the seal was in place, it was only a matter of time before Shifeng and his force fell. Skyview, why are you wasting your words on him? Why don't we just kill him? Shadowlight Axe asked. What a pity. I really wanted an exciting battle, but I guess that won't be possible, Roaring Flame sighed as he glanced at the eager crowd around him. Black Flame, how can you appear so calm in the face of death? Truly arrogant. Skyview was displeased with what he saw as he watched Shifeng, who still maintained his composure. He then laughed and ridiculed, or is the almighty guild leader Black Flame scared stiff? Do you think you can turn the tables by using the same large-scale destruction spell you used in WildhammerTown? Even if you do, it will be futile. We aren't going to stand still and let you destroy us. Even with that spell, we won't let you accomplish anything here. The Starlight Alliance members nodded in agreement. They then began to spread out. When they had learned about the means Zero Wing had used to capture WildhammerTown, they had organized appropriate countermeasures. They had divided their main combat power into several groups. They would not let Zero Wing destroy their main combatants so easily again. It seems that everyone is here now, Shifeng said as he eyed the hundreds of monster players and smoke monsters around him. In a mild tone, he continued, in that case, let's begin the real battle. Still so calm in the face of death? Do you truly think that you have a chance? Black Flame, your arrogance ends here. Get out of the way. I'll hack him down with my axe. The Starlight Alliance's upper echelons were enraged when they heard Shifeng's reply. They clearly had the upper hand, yet Shifeng remained defiant. However, as the Starlight Alliance's ranged members moved within 40 yards of the swordsman, beginning to cast their spells and knock their arrows, Shifeng pulled a crimson globe from his bag. Suddenly, a colossal magic array formed above the crowd, driving the ambient fire-type mana berserk. In the blink of an eye, the fire-type mana gathered before Shifeng and formed an 8-meter-tall flame dragon. Once the fire spirit took shape, it released a deafening roar. It seems that you're all mistaken about something. I haven't remained here because I couldn't leave. Rather, I've been waiting for you to gather around me. Let me say it again, let's begin the real battle. Chapter 2023, Misconceived Victory. Everyone in the central plaza fell silent as the fire spirit's thunderous roar echoed through the town, its powerful aura making every player feel uncomfortable. However, the pressure they felt wasn't just due to the flame dragon's high level, but also due to the creature's superior life rating. Waiting for us to gather? Are you claiming that you're so much stronger than us? Wind Cloud questioned as he eyed the fire spirit. He then returned his gaze to Shifeng and laughed, saying, since that is the case, show me how this Tier 3 archaic species of yours will defeat our monster army. Smoke monsters attack. As Wind Cloud gave the command, the humanoid smoke monsters charged past him, running at the fire spirit. These smoke monsters were more like NPCs than ordinary monsters. They did not charge at the fire spirit as a disorderly mob. Rather, they fell into proper offensive formations. 8 level 75 Grand Lord ranked smoke monsters led the charge, smoke pulling away from their forms to create shields and spears. Like a group of hunters chasing after a large beast, they quickly surrounded the flame dragon. Behind these Grand Lords, multiple groups of 10 Great Lord-ranked smoke monsters transformed parts of their bodies into longbows. In organized rows, they knocked their arrows and prepared to launch a concentrated attack. Intense killing intent filled the central plaza. A chilling sensation encompassed the players standing close to the monsters. The smoke monsters' formation shocked everyone watching. Even the Starlight Alliance's upper echelons were stupefied. What high intellect! Roaring Flame was just as stunned to see the smoke monsters move like an orderly army. He wasn't incredibly familiar with Sin Realm's trump card. It had been mentioned briefly during the meeting, but he hadn't dreamed that it would be this powerful. Militaristic formations were a large part of the reason that players could defeat a large number of powerful monsters in God's domain. Players would be able to exert greater combat power when they used such tactics than without. This was also why players could fend off monster sieges despite being outnumbered. The weakest of the hundreds of smoke monsters was a level 70 Great Lord. If these smoke monsters worked together and fought like players, they could even defeat a level 80 mythic monster, let alone a level 80 tier 3 archaic species. Good. While these smoke monsters pin down that dragon, the rest of us will surround and attack Black Flame. Do not let him escape. Skyview commanded. As he watched the smoke monsters inch closer to the fire spirit, he knew that Shifeng's final trump card had been neutralized. He no longer felt threatened by Shifeng's calm exterior. He only needed to concentrate on slaying Shifeng and announcing the Starlight Alliance's victory in Starmoon Kingdom. As Skyview fell silent, he and Shadowlight Axe led a dozen or so Great Lord-ranked monster players to surround Shifeng. The weakest among these players could reach the Trial Tower's 6th floor, and including their powerful attributes, any one of them could hold their ground against a mythic monster of the same level. Die. Skyview shouted as he finished chanting the incantation for a Tier 2 curse. However, before Skyview released his spell, he paused, noticing something that confused him. Despite more than a dozen monster players charging at him, Shifeng's expression hadn't changed. It was as if he viewed these Great Lord-ranked monster players as nothing more than air. Or perhaps he was ignoring these players. Even a true Tier 3 expert would feel threatened by so many Great Lord-ranked monster players, yet Shifeng was unfazed. Am I overthinking this? Skyview could not help but wonder if he were being too careful. Meanwhile, Shadowlight Axe and the others moved within 10 yards of the enemy swordsman and launched their attacks. Finally, Shifeng made his move. He hadn't launched his own attacks, yet Shifeng's aura abruptly skyrocketed. With unbelievable speed, the swordsman unsheathed Killing Ray, swinging the blade in a forward slash. Lightning slash. A lightning bolt instantly tore through Shadowlight Axe and his companions. The monster players and their leader lost HP at a horrific rate. After a single attack, Shadowlight Axe collapsed to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. The impact threw the dozen or so Great Lord-ranked monster players over 30 yards back as they lost more than a quarter of their HPs. Everyone who saw this was stunned. The Starlight Alliance had carefully selected expert players to become these Great Lord-ranked monster players, yet a single strike had shattered their coordinated assault. Moreover, Shadowlight Axe, the assault's leader, had died instantly. In contrast, Shifeng hadn't received 1 point of damage. In fact, he hadn't even moved from his original position. Die. Skyview growled. He finally realized how terrifying Shifeng truly was, but he still shouted in an attempt to restore his courage. Tier 2 Curse, Flame Blast. This was the most powerful spell Skyview had in his arsenal. When cast with an active Berserk skill, even a Grand Lord of the same level would suffer heavy injuries if struck directly. Suddenly, 4 gigantic fireballs appeared around Shifeng, each the size of a small house. These fireballs then descended on their target. The surrounding experts reacted and prepared for Shifeng to evade the attack, but something surprised them. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Shifeng didn't try to dodge the fireballs. He didn't even try to defend himself. Suddenly, 4 sword lights blinded the crowd, carrying enough power to split the 4 fireballs in half. How is this possible? Skyview was dumbfounded as he watched the swordsman slice apart his attack so effortlessly. Before today he had felt that even the various superpowers old monsters would flee from this attack, but now he found the idea laughable. He also viewed all of the effort he had spent trying to master the spell as one big joke. The strength to fight monster-level experts. That had only been wishful thinking. However, Skyview didn't know that Shifeng had already reached level 70, wearing equipment that not even super guild's guild leaders could dream of equipping. Most importantly, he was currently affected by both the Ring of Brilliance and Heavenly Dragon's power. Not even a level 60 mythic monster could match his strength. Following which, Shifeng appeared before the Great Lord-ranked monster players and brandished his 2 swords. After just a few seconds, one of these monster players was dead. What should we do? His strength is too high. He's using his Berserk skill. Get away from him for now. Once his Berserk skill is over, we can easily take him out. After witnessing Shifeng's performance, the Starlight Alliance's members wondered which side had the real monster. They had never expected to find a normal player that could be this powerful. They had to buy themselves some time. If even the Great Lord ranked monster players were helpless against Shifeng, other players would die instantly if they faced him. Although the Grand Lord ranked smoke monsters had high intellect, they were only monsters. After killing a few Great Lord ranked monster players, Shifeng sensed what the Starlight Alliance was trying to do. At this rate, he'd only be able to kill several dozen monster players before Heavenly Dragon's power ended. Now that I've seen these monsters' strength, it's time to end this battle, Shifeng thought to himself as he surveyed his guild members fighting in the plaza. Although only a short time had passed since the battle in the plaza had begun, Zero Wing had lost a considerable number of lives. Turning back to the Starlight Alliance's upper echelons, Shifeng said, "Since you have no intention of fighting, let's remove Golden Flow Town from the Witch's Hill." Remove? You really think you can accomplish such a thing? Although the Starlight Alliance's members watched Shifeng with fear in their eyes, their gazes still contained a spark of hope. While they were at a disadvantage now, as time passed, the situation would become more favorable for them. Suddenly Shifeng snapped his fingers. The fire spirit, which had been battling the smoke monster army, abruptly transformed into a small fire and appeared above Shifeng's head. A complex chant reached the surrounding players, increasing the town's mana density. The various superpowers hadn't viewed the fire spirit as such a strategic item, even fearing it in the past due to its prowess, but because of the number of fire-type large and super-large-scale destruction spells it wielded. No. Stop him. Skyview yelled in panic, turning deathly pale when he saw the two gigantic magic arrays forming in the sky. He could sense the power in those spells, and he knew they could rival the power of Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Before anyone could react, massive fireballs easily dwarfing the one Skyview's flame blast had created, fell from one of the arrays above the plaza, one after another. At the same time, a raging inferno erupted beneath the second magic array. In the blink of an eye, a fiery hell engulfed Golden Flow Town. Chapter 2024, Golden Flow Town falls Witch's Hill, Zero Wing City. Due to Zero Wing's successful capture of WildhammerTown, merchant and independent players began to return to Zero Wing City. Players hawked their wares and recruited team members for grinding and questing across the city. Many were even Tier 2 experts. At this point, not even Starmoon City or White River City could rival Zero Wing City's prosperity. Meanwhile, Starmoon Kingdom's various guilds, both large and small, began to send teams to investigate Zero Wing within its city. This increased the traffic in the city's bars and restaurants. Several cloaked players stood on the street outside of one of Zero Wing City's advanced bars, warily eyeing their surroundings. They only entered the bar after ensuring that they were safe. Players crowded the bar, most wearing black cloaks. If a player used a skill that could see through a black cloak's concealment, they'd discover that the cloaked players within weren't independent players. Rather, they were from the kingdom's various guilds, and they were all impressively powerful, with the weakest being a level 58 Tier 2 player. To survive in God's domain, small guilds generally formed secret alliances to withstand larger guilds. These guilds would exchange information to further their development as well. This advanced bar had become a hub for these guild members to do just that. Meanwhile, the new group of cloaked players quickly headed for a corner of the bar after entering, approaching a stone table with a single occupant. After taking a seat, the Tier 2 female elementalist that led the group looked at the assassin with a tattoo on his face and asked, "How is your investigation going? Have you learned how Zero Wing captured WildhammerTown yet?" Unlike the majority of the players in the bar, this assassin did not bother to hide his identity, boldly revealing his status as an independent player. However, despite doing so, none of the guild players present dared to look down on him. This independent player was the host of this information center, the middleman for the information gatherers and buyers. He specialized in information on Zero Wing in particular. The various guild players acknowledged this assassin as a middleman because he was also a player from Green Eye, a top adventurer team in God's domain. Unlike other adventurer teams, Green Eye focused on information gathering. Not only were its members skilled in combat, but they also possessed plenty of connections. The information they sold was always legitimate, so the various guilds trusted the team's members. Of course, as Green Eye's manpower was limited, it didn't collect information on every guild. It generally focused on first-rate or stronger guilds. Second-rate guilds and below didn't qualify for its attention. But we will only accept coins or magic crystals as payment. We'll give you a 10% discount if you pay with magic crystals, the Tier 2 assassin said, sipping from the cup of wine he held as he eyed the female elementalist before him. How much? She asked. The Green Eye Adventurer team usually accepted credits for its information, but since this information was particularly valuable, it would only accept coins or magic crystals this time. In God's domain, accomplishing anything required strength. Adventurer teams only earned credits if they were powerful enough, and to develop a team's strength, it was only natural that it charged coins or magic crystals. 500 gold, the assassin replied. 500. Isn't this a little much? When they heard the assassin's price, the few players behind the elementalist objected. At this stage of the game, 500 gold was an astronomical amount, even to expert players. Individual experts would be lucky if they obtained a weapon or equipment piece that could sell for more than 10 gold. Anything more valuable than that would be extremely difficult for individual players to get their hands on. 500 gold was a significant amount to any guild, yet the Green Eye Adventurer team demanded so much just for some information. This was simply extortion. It's not such a high price. It wasn't easy to secure this information from within Zero Wing, and we paid a heavy price to obtain it. Moreover, this includes the latest details about the guild, the Tier 2 assassin said, unperturbed by his customer's reaction. Fine. I'll pay the 500 gold. The female elementalist said, gritting her teeth. Vice Guild Leader, we just started our development in Starmoon Kingdom. We're short on funds in all aspects. Isn't this expenditure too expensive? Why don't we discuss it with the guild leader first? A Tier 2 berserker quickly suggested. Unlike the other guilds in the bar, their guild wasn't from Starmoon Kingdom. They were based in another country and had been forced to shift the guild's development to this kingdom. Despite the Tier 2 berserker's reaction, the other guild players didn't seem surprised. They simply minded their own business. Such occurrences were very common in the virtual gaming world, especially in the incredibly popular God's Domain. A large number of guilds rose and fell in the game on a daily basis. So, it wasn't surprising to hear that a guild had shifted its focus to another kingdom since its original home base was no longer habitable. However, if the various guild players noticed the guild emblem on the female elementalist and her companions, they'd be surprised. This guild emblem belonged to the 100 Flowers Pavilion, a first-rate guild. It was a colossal existence to these various guilds, a true large guild that would be considered an overlord in any kingdom. That won't be necessary. I'll pay this 500 gold from my own pocket. We don't need to use the guild's funds, the female elementalist responded, shaking her head. She then took out 500 gold and handed the coins to the independent assassin. Here is all of the information we have gathered on Zero Wing recently. Take a look. After receiving the 500 gold, the assassin took out a crystal ball and traded it with the female elementalist. The crystal ball contained a recording of all of Zero Wing's latest movements. It also held more than a dozen battle videos of the fight in WildhammerTown. Naturally, these battle videos involved the giant players. In addition, one video within the crystal ball showed Zero Wing's arrival in Golden Flow Town. Unfortunately, the video didn't have a long duration, cutting off after 10 or so seconds of footage. Is Zero Wing insane? It's actually attacking the heavily fortified Golden Flow Town? The female elementalist was astonished after examining the information within the crystal ball. Golden Flow Town was the Starlight Alliance's last remaining town, and the Alliance had invested an unimaginable amount of manpower and resources in it, yet Zero Wing had besieged the town the moment it finished capturing WildhammerTown. No matter how she looked at it, she couldn't take this matter seriously. Vice Guild Leader, what should we do? Should we move to another kingdom or stay here? The other upper echelons from the 100 Flowers Pavilion asked softly. The 100 Flowers Pavilion had decided that the chaos in Starmoon Kingdom made for an excellent opportunity to leave the Dark Knight Empire. Although the kingdom didn't have as many resources as the Empire, it had grown into a considerably powerful country after several major events. If the 100 Flowers Pavilion could secure a foothold in Starmoon Kingdom, it could rise to power once more. As Cleansed Rue, the 100 Flowers Pavilion's vice guild leader, decided her guild's future, the bar's atmosphere changed. Suddenly, A heavy sensation enveloped the bar. What's happening? Cleansed Rue wondered aloud as she looked around at the bar's customers. What? Your guild didn't receive the announcement? The assassin from Green Eye asked, giving Cleansed Rue a strange look. Every guild member from the Warring Empire has just received a message stating that Golden Flow Town has fallen. Chapter 2025, Reversal. Cleansed Rue and her entourage were stunned. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. They were only able to digest the information after a long moment, and like the other guild players in the bar, they found the news to be both heavy and outlandish. How is that possible? That was the Starlight Alliance's final town. Cleansed Rue exclaimed. Any guild that paid any attention to the situation in the Witch's Hill knew how powerful the Starlight Alliance had become. They were also familiar with the Alliance's monster players, which had already displayed frightening combat power. Tier 2 experts weren't even a match for the High Lord-ranked monster players, and the Alliance had plenty of great lords. She found it truly hard to imagine that the Starlight Alliance would not increase Golden Flow Town's defenses after losing WildhammerTown. After all, Golden Flow Town was the Alliance's last town in the Witch's Hill, and without it, the Starlight Alliance would have a difficult time wresting control of the Witch's Hill from Zero Wing, regardless of how many monster players it had. That can't be true, can it? Didn't Zero Wing just capture WildhammerTown? Could the informant have been mistaken? Maybe the information referred to WildhammerTown? An upper echelon from the 100 Flowers Palace asked. Are you trying to accuse Green Eye of selling false information? The assassin from the adventurer team asked acidically, anger flashing in his eyes as he stared at the 100 Flowers Palace member. Those in the intelligence industry prioritized credibility above all else. Accusing the Green Eye of selling false information was the greatest slander one could possibly commit about the adventurer team. No, it was just a slip of the tongue, Cleansed Rue hurriedly apologized before glancing at the several guild upper echelons behind her. This news is no longer a secret. Every guild in the kingdom likely knows about the event already. If you don't believe me, you can investigate the Warring Empire yourself. I doubt it will be long before the news spreads throughout Starmoon Kingdom, the assassin said, nodding as his gaze returned to its previously cold indifference. Calmly he continued, if you want to set your sights on the Witch's Hill, based on the current situation, I'd advise against it. Zero Wing captured both Wildhammertown and Golden Flow Town almost as soon as it decided to do so. Moving against Zero Wing would be utterly foolish after witnessing such prowess. Some had once viewed the Starlight Alliance as the last hope of overthrowing Zero Wing in the kingdom, but now Zero Wing had made an example of the Alliance, deterring the various guilds in Starmoon Kingdom from considering taking control of the Witch's Hill and the kingdom itself. I very much agree with you. We can no longer imagine Zero Wing's true strength, and although the Starlight Alliance is formidable, it's nothing in comparison. The Alliance made a massive mistake when it made an enemy of Zero Wing, a robust Tier 2 male berserker said as he approached the stone table the 100 Flowers Palace and Green Eye occupied. While I admit that Zero Wing is very strong, don't you think you're blowing things out of proportion? You speak as if you are acutely familiar with the guild. The occupants of other tables ridiculed the berserker. However, before the jeering could begin, the Tier 2 berserker removed his black cloak and revealed his true appearance. What? The Assassins Alliance's guild leader is here. The crowd that had been about to laugh at this berserker promptly fell silent. The Assassins Alliance was a bona fide second-rate guild, and it had been developing rapidly recently. It had already clashed with many first-rate guilds in the Twin Towers Kingdom and begun to show signs of growing into a top-ranked second-rate guild. Cruel Sword, the Assassins Alliance's guild leader, even ranked on the God's Domain's experts list. If not for Zero Wing's several great experts overshadowing him, Cruel Sword would have been relatively famous in Starmoon Kingdom. When they saw Cruel Sword's face, the various guild players in the bar stopped treating his claim as a joke. Now they only had respect for his words. Thank you for your warning, Guild Leader Sword. Cleansed Rue, who still wore her black cloak, expressed her gratitude. It's nothing. Vice Guild Leader Rue is being overly polite, Cruel Sword responded quietly. However, I'm certainly surprised that the 100 Flowers Palace wants to develop in Starmoon Kingdom. Meanwhile, the instant Cruel Sword revealed her identity, Cleansed Rue's expression became vigilant. However, she quickly realized that he had simply used an advanced identification skill. Obtaining such a skill wasn't difficult in a top-tier second-rate guild. She immediately relaxed her guard. We have no other choice. I'm sure you've heard of the Hundred Flowers Palace's current predicament, Cleansed Rue said grimly, her mood souring as she mentioned her guild's struggles. Ah, that's right, it's truly a pity. Cruel Sword lowered his head and fell silent. But Guild Leader Sword, you are impressive. Not only have you led the Assassin's Alliance to flourish in Starmoon Kingdom, but your guild's performance in the Twin Towers Kingdom has also been noteworthy, Cleansed Rue said with a hint of admiration in her gaze. Her eyes also held a flash of anticipation. Are you here to sell some information on the powers in the Twin Towers Kingdom? The Hundred Flowers Palace is willing to purchase the information for a high price. The palace had also intended to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom and had investigated the situation there, but the guild hadn't invested significant resources yet, focusing on securing the hidden class, Demon Blade Knight, by slaying abyssal monsters. Now that the situation in Starmoon Kingdom had reached this point, the Hundred Flowers Palace had no hope of developing in the kingdom. If Zero Wing were able to crush a local power like the Starlight Alliance so decisively, eliminating a foreign power would be child's play. If the Hundred Flowers Palace tried to establish itself in Starmoon Kingdom, it would face utter annihilation. No power would tolerate others in its territory, where resources were limited. Otherwise, God's domain's various powers wouldn't compete so desperately. Hence, the Twin Towers Kingdom was the palace's last hope. The Twin Towers Kingdom was in chaos due to the threat of abyssal monsters. Even so, quite a few powers contested for control of the kingdom. Meanwhile, the Assassin's Alliance was one of the few outstanding performers in the battle for prominence, but the guild had only focused on developing in maps near Starmoon Kingdom. Information on the Twin Towers Kingdom? Glancing around him, Cruel Sword replied, "This isn't the place for that discussion. Let's head to one of the rooms upstairs." He had already attracted the crowd's attention in the bar, and although others couldn't listen to their private discussion, there was the possibility that one of these players possessed a special skill that would allow them to do so. Cleansed Rue nodded, understanding that the bar was too public for their talk. Cruel Sword and Cleansed Rue then left for a VIP room on the second floor alongside their subordinates. Although the VIP room was not large, its design was magnificent, and it could easily accommodate more than a dozen people. Guild Leader Sword, let's be straightforward. If you are willing to sell detailed information on the Twin Towers Kingdom, we're willing to offer you 5 pieces of epic equipment, Cleansed Rue said as soon as she took a seat. The Hundred Flowers Palace is truly a first-rate guild. Even after falling so far, it still has such a stable foundation, Cruel Sword commended, surprised. Obtaining a single piece of epic equipment was incredibly difficult, and despite the Assassin's Alliance's recent achievements, the guild had fewer than 20 epic items. The guild treated these items as their foundation, refusing to sell them under any circumstances. We offer the price because the Assassin's Alliance is worth it. Do you agree to our offer, Guild Leader Sword? Cleansed Rue asked, smiling. The Assassin's Alliance's performance in the Twin Towers Kingdom had been exceptional. It operated alongside quite a few first-rate guilds, and the fact that the Assassin's Alliance had laid claim to a significant portion of the kingdom, despite its second-rate status, was astounding. Without enough strength and understanding of the kingdom, accomplishing such a feat would have been impossible. I understand your determination to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Cruel Sword said. With a serious expression he continued, however, I'm afraid you are asking the wrong guild. If the Hundred Flowers Palace wishes to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom, you shouldn't look to the Assassin's Alliance. Why not? Cleansed Rue gave Cruel Sword a confused look. She didn't understand what he was trying to tell her. Was the man refusing to cooperate? Or was he dissatisfied with the compensation she offered? Don't misunderstand me. It's not that I don't want to trade with you, but I'm afraid that my guild doesn't have the ability you are looking for, Cruel Sword explained when he saw the Vice Guild leader's heavy expression. You must be joking. If the Assassin's Alliance can't help us, then who in the kingdom can? Cleansed Rue wondered if the man before her were playing some kind of joke. No. You might think that I'm joking, but I'm telling you the truth, Cruel Sword said as he shook his head. If your guild wishes to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom, you need to visit Zero Wing. If you do, your guild might be able to make a comeback. Chapter 2026, Zero Wing's Hidden Strength. Visit Zero Wing. Cleansed Rue wasn't the only one confused. The several hundred flowers palace upper echelons behind her revealed similarly shocked expressions. Based on the information they had obtained, Zero Wing only operated in Starmoon Kingdom, the Ur Empire, and the Black Dragon Empire. Although they had found Zero Wing's shadow in the Twin Towers Kingdom, the guild hadn't accomplished anything in the kingdom thus far. Yet, Cruel Sword told them that if their guild wanted to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom, it needed to speak with Zero Wing. That's right. If you want to gain a foothold in the kingdom, you should speak with Zero Wing, Cruel Sword said, nodding his head. Rather, if the Hundred Flowers Palace wishes to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom successfully, it can only do so with Zero Wing's help. Does Zero Wing really have that much power? The palace's upper echelons gave Cruel Sword skeptical looks. Zero Wing was impressive for reaching its current state without any background or support, but based on the information they had gathered, the guild shouldn't have any relation to the Twin Towers Kingdom. They found it hard to believe that Zero Wing could help them develop in the kingdom. Of course it does. Cruel Sword insisted. The Assassin's Alliance has only developed so rapidly in the kingdom due to Zero Wing's assistance. I'm sure you know about the abyssal monsters in the Twin Towers Kingdom and how dangerous it is in the fields. If one cannot avoid these monsters, developing in the kingdom would be incredibly difficult. Meanwhile, Zero Wing can construct magic arrays that repel the abyssal monsters, preventing them from approaching a specific area. My guild only established itself in the kingdom due to the magic arrays Zero Wing set up. Unlike the other guilds in the kingdom, the Assassin's Alliance has taken almost no damage. It's only natural that the other guilds are no match for us. A magic array that can repel abyssal monsters? Zero Wing has such a thing? Realization dawned on Cleansed Rue and the others after listening to Cruel Sword's explanation. In reality, the Twin Towers Kingdom had just as many resources as Starmoon Kingdom, but the abyssal monsters' invasion had crippled it. Even so, the temptation of a new class had lured many players to the kingdom. If a guild could construct magic arrays that repelled abyssal monsters, it could monopolize the various resource-rich maps in the Twin Towers Kingdom. It was easy to imagine how quickly a guild could develop with such an advantage. It was no wonder why the Assassin's Alliance's performance in the kingdom had been so impressive, leaving the various first-rate guilds in its dust. If what Cruel Sword said was true, then the Hundred Flowers Palace truly needed to visit Zero Wing. Thank you for sharing such integral information, Guild Leader Sword, Cleansed Rue thanked the man. I'll have someone deliver the 5 pieces of epic equipment I've promised tomorrow. Although Cruel Sword hadn't provided any details about the various powers in the Twin Towers Kingdom, such information paled in comparison to what he had told her about the magic arrays that could repel abyssal monsters. Let's forget about the epic equipment. I simply told you this to gain an ally in the Twin Towers Kingdom. Whether or not you persuade Guild Leader Black Flame to help you is entirely up to you. I haven't actually done anything, Cruel Sword said, refusing the offer. No. I must thank you. Moreover, I'd like to ask you to introduce us to Zero Wing, Cleansed Rue firmly insisted, shaking her head. She had some understanding of the Assassin's Alliance's situation in the Twin Towers Kingdom. Due to the guild's recent growth, the various first-rate guilds in the kingdom had secretly banded together to hinder the Assassin's Alliance's progress. As a result, the guild hadn't been able to operate in the kingdom's central region. She also knew why Cruel Sword rejected her offer. If the Assassin's Alliance had a powerful ally, it could reduce the pressure it faced. The Hundred Flowers Palace was undoubtedly a good fit for the position. However, no one would doubt that Cruel Sword had provided the palace with this information. Introduce you? After giving the matter some thought, Cruel Sword said, all right. I'll talk to Zero Wing about this matter, but I can't guarantee that the guild will agree to a meeting. After Cleansed Rue and Cruel Sword finished their discussion, Cleansed Rue left the bar with her subordinates and made their way to Zero Wing's residence. She was in such a hurry because of the fact that the Twin Towers Kingdom was the best hope for the Hundred Flowers Palace, and the guild didn't have much time left. The longer they delayed shifting their base of operations, the more their guild would suffer. As Cleansed Rue and her entourage walked through Zero Wing City streets, they noticed that the news of Zero Wing's dominance in Golden Flow Town had already spread throughout the city. Excitement filled the air, and the merchant players were particularly lively. They found it hard to imagine that not long ago, an intense killing intent had enveloped Zero Wing City. There are so many merchant players and Tier 2 players here. Zero Wing City has almost caught up to Dark Knight City. This city may not be a match for Dark Knight City yet, but the political situation in Dark Knight City is chaotic. On the other hand, Zero Wing has full control of its city. That's true. It really makes you wonder how strong Zero Wing actually is. Zero Wing City is already so impressive, and the guild has so much influence in the Black Dragon and her empires. It even has influence in the Twin Towers Kingdom. The 100 Flowers Palace's upper echelons, who rode an advanced horse carriage, gained a newfound appreciation for Zero Wing as they watched players roam the city streets. They had never considered that Zero Wing had hidden so much of its power. They hadn't expected that their guild, a bona fide first-rate guild, would have to cooperate with Zero Wing to continue its existence in God's domain either. Do you think that Zero Wing will agree to work with our guild? A female cleric asked worriedly, gripping a wooden staff in her hands. The 100 Flowers Palace is a first-rate guild. Even though we have fallen from our peak, we are still much stronger than any ordinary guild. If Zero Wing wants to secure more resources from the Twin Towers Kingdom, why wouldn't it agree to cooperate? A bearded, middle-aged man stated confidently. While you're not exactly wrong, although the female cleric wanted to offer a retort, she held back. Zero Wing had the ability to produce a magic array that could repel abyssal monsters. In other words, Zero Wing had the initiative. And while Zero Wing could cooperate with many other guilds, the guild was the 100 Flowers Palace's only hope. Alright, enough talking. We've arrived. Cleansed Rue also knew how disadvantageous the palace's current position was, and she was just as worried as her companion. Once the horse carriage rolled to a stop, she disembarked. Their carriage had stopped before the main entrance to Zero Wing's residence. When Cleansed Rue and her subordinates left the carriage, they were stupefied by the scene before them. Hundreds of 4-meter-tall players stood beyond the main threshold, all of which had reached level 60. They also wore level 55+ top-tier equipment, and some even sported pieces of level 60 fine gold equipment. Their auras were so intense that even peak experts like Cleansed Rue and her entourage couldn't help but shudder. However, these giants weren't the most eye-catching scene within the residence. Rather, what caught Cleansed Rue's attention were the 8 2-story-tall, crimson tanks parked within. These crimson tanks were none other than the rumored Hell tanks. However, Zero Wing had used these Hell tanks constantly in the Ur Empire, and they weren't easy to move elsewhere. In other words, these 8 Hell tanks weren't the war weapons that defended Silverwing Town. Zero Wing had only recently built these tanks. While Cleansed Rue and the others stared at the war weapons in astonishment, a beautiful woman in luxurious clothing approached. When they saw this woman, the representatives from the 100 Flowers Palace couldn't help but gasp. Their reaction hadn't been a result of witnessing the woman's elegance and beauty, but because of her level and equipment. Not only was she a level 61 Tier 2 summoner, but she actually possessed 3 pieces of epic equipment. And they had never heard of this woman before. Hello, you must be from the 100 Flowers Palace, correct? I am Youlan, Zero Wing City's trade manager. Our guild leader has heard of your situation from guild leader Cruel Sword, Youlan said as she beamed an elegant smile at Cleansed Rue's group. Please follow me. Chapter 2027, Obscure Experts. When Cleansed Rue and the others saw Youlan and felt the powerful pressure she radiated, they could not help their surprise. No matter how they looked at it, a level 61 Tier 2 player with 3 pieces of epic equipment should be well known. The highest level players in God's domain's various empires had only reached level 61. Even the Dark Knight Empire only had 5 of these experts. She must be one of Zero Wing's hidden peak experts, the Tier 2 female cleric from the 100 Flowers Palace said through the team chat. I agree. With her level and equipment, she is definitely on the level of Zero Wing's Fire Dance, the middle-aged Tier 2 berserker agreed, nodding. The rest of the team nodded as well. God's domain's various guilds generally hid some of their power, including the 100 Flowers Palace. However, unlike Zero Wing, the palace hadn't hidden an expert as powerful as Youlan. Reserving such an expert would be a waste. But when they considered Zero Wing's stealthy presence in so many locations, they realized that it wasn't strange to hide a peak expert. When they remembered the 8 new Hell tanks sitting in the residence as well, goosebumps erupted across their arms. They had learned some details about those Hell tanks, and they knew that each tank was the equivalent of a mobile defense turret. Moreover, the Hell tank's defensive and melee capabilities were far beyond defense turrets, Yet 8 of these tanks were stationed within Zero Wing's residence. Alright, enough. Let's prepare to enter Zero Wing's residence. Don't forget that you represent the 100 Flowers Palace. Once we're inside, do not do anything that would sully the guild's reputation. Cleansed Rue said, expressing her dissatisfaction with her teammates' actions. After lecturing her team, she followed Youlan into the residence. As a residence within a guild territory, Zero Wing's residence was far more spacious than those normally found in NPC cities. Not only did the residence have far more facilities than normal, but its mana density was even higher than elsewhere. It felt pleasant just to walk through the residence's halls. The 100 Flowers Palace's members also discovered a change to their double EXP BU accumulation bars, located directly beneath their experience bars. Amazing! Players can actually accumulate the double EXP buff so quickly here. Although players would start to accumulate the double EXP buff the moment they entered Zero Wing City, they could only accumulate 20% after a 48-hour stay. However, players would accumulate 30% after resting in the residence for the same amount of time. Visiting the residence was 50% more effective than just visiting the city. Even in first-rate guilds, very few players enjoyed such an astounding accumulation rate. After all, a guild hall only had a limited number of private rooms, and only the guild's expert members were usually allowed to rent the rooms for GCPs. Accumulate 20% after a 48-hour stay. However, players would accumulate 30% after resting in the residence for the same amount of time. Visiting the residence was 50% more effective than just visiting the city. Even in first-rate guilds, very few players enjoyed such an astounding accumulation rate. After all, a guild hall only had a limited number of private rooms, and only the guild's expert members were usually allowed to rent the rooms for GCPs. As Cleansed Rue and her companions entered the guild hall, yet another spectacular scene greeted them. Zero Wing members filled the first floor hall, all of which were level 57 or higher. These players' levels were on par with first-rate guild's expert members. Furthermore, even if they ignored the giant players, there were hundreds of Tier 2 players in the hall. The number of Tier 2 experts within Zero Wing City was almost half as many Tier 2 players in 100 Flowers Palace. Quite a few NPCs also moved around the hall, making up roughly 30% of the first floor hall's occupants. This isn't a joke, right? Judging by the number of NPCs here, easily 4,000 NPCs visit this residence each day. Only about 600 NPCs visit our main headquarters to commission guild quests per day. The Tier 2 cleric stared with wide, shocked eyes when she saw the number of NPCs milling about the hall. Aside from player count and strength, a guild's prosperity relied on the number of guild quests it received from NPCs each day. Not only did these commission guild quests bring in a significant amount of income, but they also awarded a lot of benefits to the guild members that completed them. Over 70% of the high-ranked quests the 100 Flowers Palace's members received were commissions from the NPCs that visited the guild residences. Even the guild's expert players fought to complete high-ranked quests. No, that's not it. Look over there. Some of these NPCs are nobles. A Tier 2 ranger with sharp eyesight said as he pointed to a handsome witch-dressed man nearby. 2 maids followed the man around. Even Baron-ranked NPCs commissioned Zero Wing for quests? Cleansed Rue's heart skipped a beat when she inspected the handsome man with her identification skill. There was a massive difference in God's domain between noble NPCs and ordinary NPCs. NPC nobles rarely reached out to veteran first-rate guilds like the 100 Flowers Palace for quests. When they did, these quests were typically quite important and yielded valuable treasure. Moreover, those quests were from ordinary NPC nobles. She had never seen a ranked NPC noble commission the 100 Flowers Palace to complete a quest. There were currently more than 30 ordinary noble NPCs in Zero Wing's hall, in addition to 2 Baron-ranked NPCs. Every one of these nobles stood in line to request Zero Wing's help with a quest. It was unbelievable. Once Cleansed Rue and the other upper echelons from her guild finished gawking, Youlan led them to the guild leader's office on the guild hall's top floor. 2 NPC guards stood before the guild leader's office, and both were level 80 NPCs. Although they stood by the door quietly, their auras made Cleansed Rue and her companions' hearts palpitate. They actually used secret silver personal guards to guard an office. The 100 Flowers Palace's members were speechless when they saw the 2 personal guards. Nowadays, the various guilds had allotted some of their focus to searching for and nurturing personal guards. Even so, the number of high-ranked personal guards the guilds had actually found was pitifully low. Most of the personal guards the various guilds employed were merely bronze rank. Mysterious iron personal guards were as rare and valuable as a piece of epic equipment. As for secret silver rank, the 100 Flowers Palace had only obtained 3 secret silver personal guards thus far, and only because it had gotten lucky. The other first-rate guilds generally only had 1 or 2. These secret silver personal guards were valued as priceless treasures and wouldn't be given any responsibility. Rather, guilds would instruct them to focus on improving their strength and levels. Yet, Zero Wing used 2 secret silver personal guards to guard an office. Under Youlan's lead, Cleansed Rue and her entourage entered the guild leader's office. A cloaked man sat behind a desk within the office. A dozen or so expert players stood beside him, including Silent Blattle, Stubborn Bone, Remnant Cloud, Graceful Moon, and Seven Light. The lowest leveled player among them was level 61, while the highest had reached level 62. Every one of these players wore level 60 fine gold and dark gold equipment, and some even wore a piece of epic equipment. When Cleansed Rue sensed these players' auras, she felt the threat of death loom over her. Their auras were no less intense than Youlan's. After crossing the threshold and sensing the powerful auras of the dozen or so Zero Wing members, the several hundred Flowers Palace upper echelons stumbled to a halt, not daring to take another step into the room. Are you kidding me? These people are all Zero Wing members? As the palace's upper echelons gazed at Silent Blade and the others, whom they had never heard of before, they lost any and all confidence. Now they only felt an immense pressure. Welcome to our residence, friends from the 100 Flowers Palace. I've heard that you have something you wish to discuss with me. May I know what it is about? Shi Feng, who sat in the guild leader's seat, asked Cleansed Rue and the others. Chapter 2028, Youlan's Proposal. Shi Feng's words snapped Cleansed Rue and her entourage out of their daze. Right. Thank you for finding time to meet with us in your busy schedule, Guild Leader Black Flame. I am Cleansed Rue, the 100 Flowers Palace's Vice Guild Leader. I am here to represent my guild in our request for cooperation with Zero Wing, Cleansed Rue explained after regaining her senses. To think that even the Dark Knight Empire's famous Frost Flame Goddess has come to visit me, it would seem that you have an extraordinary request. Can I trouble you to elaborate? It will allow me to make a more sound decision, Shi Feng calmly asked as he watched Cleansed Rue's tense expression. Certainly. Cleansed Rue nodded. She then explained why the 100 Flowers Palace wanted to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom without withholding any details. Before they had arrived at Zero Wing's residence, the guild upper echelons accompanying Cleansed Rue had disagreed with revealing their situation to Zero Wing. However, their discontentment had vanished after witnessing Zero Wing's residence. Meanwhile, Shi Feng hadn't spoken a single word throughout Cleansed Rue's explanation, and this made the 100 Flowers Palace's upper echelons nervous. Zero Wing was far stronger than they had imagined. They had assumed that Zero Wing had only allied with the Assassin's Alliance because it lacked the manpower to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom personally, but after witnessing the guild's residence, they realized that Zero Wing was fully capable of securing a foothold in the kingdom without any assistance. It did not need anyone's help to exploit the Twin Towers Kingdom's resources. While your proposal is interesting, please allow me to reject it, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. What? If you help us contest with the other first-rate guilds in the kingdom, we can quickly secure the kingdom's central region. We'll be able to provide Zero Wing with even more resources than the Assassin's Alliance. Cleansed Rue impulsively retorted as she stared at Shi Feng's impassive expression. As you have seen, Zero Wing previously lacked the strength to lay claim to the Twin Towers Kingdom's territories, but my guild has grown. With how rapidly Zero Wing has been developing lately, we'll need to expand our territories. Zero Wing no longer faces a lack of resources, Shi Feng said as he gestured to Silent Blade and the others. If we hand over the Twin Towers Kingdom's territories to the 100 Flowers Palace, the kingdom won't have much left for us. It's not that I don't want to help you, but for the sake of my own guild's development, I can't afford to help. Cleansed Rue fell silent for quite some time. She simply could not think of a rebuttal. Shi Feng's decision was reasonable. As a guild leader, his priority would forever be the guild's benefit. How could he possibly give up a good expansion opportunity to help another guild? Now that Zero Wing had defeated the almighty Starlight Alliance and stabilized its rule in the Witch's Hill, This was the perfect opportunity for the guild to expand its influence. If she were in his place, she'd likely choose her own guild's development over helping another as well. The other 100 Flowers Palace despaired upon hearing Shifeng's decision. What should we do now? One of the 100 Flowers Palace's upper echelons muttered in the team chat. Currently, the 100 Flowers Palace had already begun to prepare for its migration from the Dark Knight Empire, yet they had just been told that their two best options were no longer available. With how weak the 100 Flowers Palace had become, contesting for kingdoms under other first-rate guilds' rule would be nigh impossible. As Cleansed Rue and her companions began to panic, Youlan, who stood near the group, stepped forward with a smile. Guild leader, I have a proposal that will benefit both our guild and the 100 Flowers Palace. May I speak up? Youlan asked respectfully. A proposal that will benefit both guilds? Let's hear it then. After all, the 100 Flowers Palace has taken the initiative to seek our help. We can't disappoint the palace too much, Shifeng said and nodded after giving the matter some thought. Understood. Youlan then straightened herself and continued, the 100 Flowers Palace is struggling due to the fact that it doesn't have enough territory to sustain itself. This is all because of Starlink's interference, hampering the palace's continued survival in the Dark Knight Empire. But what if the palace could defend itself against Starlink? If that were possible, couldn't the palace remain in the Dark Knight Empire? However, trying to stand against a superpower like Starlink isn't an easy task. Even if our guild sends an army to assist, we're not likely to accomplish anything. We'll need sufficient support from the 100 Flowers Palace itself. Support? Upon hearing Youlan's words, Cleansed Rue's eyes began to glow as she hurriedly interjected, if such an operation requires funds or manpower, that won't be an issue. If you can help defend our position, the 100 Flowers Palace will supply Zero Wing with plenty of the Empire's resources. She had gained a certain level of understanding of Zero Wing's strength. If Zero Wing were willing to help the 100 Flowers Palace on a large scale, the palace should have no problem defending over half of its territories in the Empire. Although I have offered this proposal, the risk of openly opposing a thriving superpower is incredibly high. Moreover, this war will definitely be a protracted one. Zero Wing will also have to keep an eye out for multiple enemy superpowers. This is no longer a problem that can be solved with funds and resources. If the situation is not handled properly, Zero Wing could suffer on all fronts. I don't believe that anyone wants to see that outcome, Youlan said, shaking her head as she glanced at Cleansed Rue. Is there no better way to help them? Shifeng asked, pretending to sigh in disappointment. However, he was quite satisfied with Youlan's performance. There is. Our two guilds can form a mutually dependent relationship. If Zero Wing has management rights to the palace's shops and lands, and we can become close allies, Zero Wing can develop in the Dark Knight Empire and amass enough strength to contend with Starlink. It wouldn't affect our strength in our other territories, satisfying our guild with the alliance, Youlan said after giving the matter some thought. This, Cleansed Rue couldn't help but hesitate. Shops were a part of a guild's foundation, but with the 100 Flowers Palace's current state, they couldn't afford more of a delay. Gritting her teeth, she turned to Youlan and asked, how many shops will Zero Wing require? If we want to amass enough strength to survive in the Dark Knight Empire, we'll need around 60% of the 100 Flowers Palace's shops, Youlan replied seriously. 60. Isn't this a little? Cleansed Rue's eyes widened in shock and she broke out in a cold sweat. The majority of the 100 Flowers Palace's funds and resources originated from the guild's shops. If the guild suddenly lost 60% of these shops, it would definitely impact the guild's operations. Youlan, the 100 Flowers Palace could become one of Zero Wing's close allies in the future. Is there no way to reduce the cost a little? Shifeng asked, playing along. Since you insist, then, 50%. Any less, and we'd have to dig into the funds and resources from our other territories. We'd be at a disadvantage against the superpowers in those areas, Youlan said with a troubled expression. That's the gist of the situation. What is your opinion on this matter, Vice Guild Leader Rue? Shifeng asked softly, turning to Cleansed Rue. Chapter 2029, Presumptuous Request 50%. Cleansed Rue and her companions revealed bitter smiles. Even losing 50% of the guild's shops and lands was unbearable for the 100 Flowers Palace. Both were essential to a guild's development, and neither could be casually sold off. If the Hundred Flowers Palace lost half of the shops and lands under its control, the guild would be forced to limit the scale of its operations due to the decreased income, even if the guild could survive in the Dark Knight Empire. If that happened, returning to the guild's former glory would become excruciatingly difficult. Most of the lands in major NPC cities were already owned, and even if they had the money, it wasn't necessarily possible to purchase more. I know this isn't an ideal offer, but we have our own troubles to deal with. You can return to your guild and consider the offer carefully, Shifeng announced, watching the silent group before him. Guild leader, our guild intends to develop in the Twin Towers Kingdom. We'll need a lot of manpower to accomplish this. So, we'll need to know whether or not we're going to help the Hundred Flowers Palace as soon as possible to see to the appropriate preparations. Otherwise, this alliance will impact our original plans, Youlan hurriedly advised. Cleansed Rue and her entourage's expressions twisted further. As guild upper echelons, they knew that planning was necessary before a guild began a large-scale operation. If Zero Wing truly intended to mobilize a large amount of manpower to lay claim to the Twin Towers Kingdom, then helping the Hundred Flowers Palace would become far more difficult for the guild. Zero Wing might even dismiss the idea of providing assistance entirely. How soon do we need to make a decision? Shifeng asked. A day if possible, Youlan replied after giving the matter some thought. That will be the opportune time for our guild to expand. Although Cleansed Rue and the other upper echelons wanted to comment, they couldn't bring themselves to speak up. They couldn't possibly tell Shifeng that they'd need a long time to gather the guild's upper echelons and elders, not to mention the representatives from the major corporations that supported the Hundred Flowers Palace. One day simply wasn't enough time for the palace to reach a decision. In fact, the decision to abandon the Dark Knight Empire and develop in another kingdom had only been made after a lengthy discussion. The proposal to partner with Zero Wing would likely take even longer. Too many people and organizations were tied to this matter, and persuading all parties involved would be extremely difficult. How is such a short time enough to negotiate anything? Try to find a way to give them more time. Shifeng sternly commanded when he saw the awkward expressions on the Hundred Flowers Palace's upper echelons. Deciding something so important in a single day was impossible for any guild, especially a true veteran first-rate guild like the Hundred Flowers Palace. Too many people held shares of the guild. We can hold off for 2 days, but we will miss out on the opportune moment to strike in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Youlan said, her imperative tone implying that Zero Wing would cough blood if it gave the palace a second more. Thank you, Guild Leader Black Flame, Cleansed Rue said sincerely. However, before I negotiate with my guild's upper echelons, may I make a presumptuous request? Let me hear it. As a potential ally, I will help wherever I can, Shifeng said, nodding after giving the matter some thought. I'd like to borrow Zero Wing's strength during the meeting to show my guild that we truly have hope of fending off Starling's harassment. I'm sure they will find it easier to agree to the partnership that way, Cleansed Rue said as she turned to Silent Blade and the others who stood beside Shifeng. Silent Blade and his comrades were all level 61, tier 2 players or above, and every one of them radiated a deadly aura. No guild could afford to take their strength lightly. If she could show off Zero Wing's experts, she believed that she could persuade her guild's upper echelons to agree to this alliance. After all, the Hundred Flowers Palace's members would have a much easier time developing if they could continue in the Dark Knight Empire, where they were comfortable, rather than migrating to another kingdom. That won't be a problem. Before your meeting begins, I'll send some people to express Zero Wing's sincerity. Shifeng agreed. He understood Cleansed Rue's thoughts. Convincing people was easier if one provided a personal experience. Cleansed Rue and her subordinates soon left Zero Wing's residence, returning to the Dark Knight Empire to break the news to their guild. They weren't in such a hurry simply because of the time limit Zero Wing had given them, but because the Hundred Flowers Palace didn't have much time left in the Empire without help. They needed to move quickly. After the palace's representatives left, the atmosphere in the guild leader's office relaxed. Stubborn Bone and Remnant Cloud, who had both served as commanders of an adventurer team, couldn't help but turn reverent gazes on Shifeng. Both of their teams had been well-known adventurer teams, but compared to first-rate guilds, they had been insignificant. Yet, they had just witnessed a veteran first-rate guild like the Hundred Flowers Palace submit before Shifeng. Guild leader, although the Hundred Flowers Palace is in a precarious state right now, I'm afraid that Cleansed Rue will have a difficult time persuading the palace's old members with her status as a vice-guild leader. I suggest that we send Fire Dance and the others to visit the guild in the Dark Knight Empire. If they attend the meeting, I'm sure that those old members will agree to the partnership regardless of their personal feelings. If this partnership succeeds, developing in the Dark Knight Empire will become much easier. We won't have to waste a large amount of time and manpower building a foundation from scratch, Youlan offered after Cleansed Rue and her companions had left the residence. Forget it. Fire and the others are still participating in their special training. Let's not interrupt them, Shifeng said, shaking his head. We'll just send Silent and his team. Although Silent Blade, Stubborn Bone, Remnant Cloud, and the others hadn't been members of Zero Wing long, they had grown a lot stronger after training in the Lost Town's Extraordinary Tower. Shifeng had to admit that the Realms of Truth training was immensely helpful to expert players. Despite the fact that they hadn't yet entered the Realms of Truth, Silent Blade and the others had successfully mastered one or two advanced combat techniques during their training in the Extraordinary Tower. With how close they were to reaching the Refinement Realm, their overall combat power could now rival true Refinement Realm experts. Furthermore, Silent Blade and his team were geared in weapons and equipment that even the various superpowers struggled to acquire at this stage of the game. Only superpowers peak experts had a chance of defeating these Zero-Wing experts. Youlan could not help but worry as she looked at Remnant Cloud and the other players standing by Shifeng's side. Although she knew that their combat standards were on par with hers, she was concerned that they wouldn't be enough to fulfill their purpose. Relax. I'll give them something good before they leave. Once the palace's people see it, they'll know what the wisest decision is, Shifeng said, chuckling. He then asked, how is the material collection I tasked you and Melancholic Smile with coming along? We have done our best to gather as many of the materials you requested. However, the required stock is massive, and every material is incredibly rare. Even after raiding the treasuries in the Starlight Alliance's 2 guild towns, we have barely collected 5 sets of materials, Youlan said. Good. Transfer the materials to White River City's Candlelight trading firm immediately. Shifeng was ecstatic to hear the news. Also, notify Melancholic and tell her to gather the people I requested earlier. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He could finally craft the guardian puppet. Chapter 2030, Puppet Production. Starmoon Kingdom, White River City. As Shifeng left the crowded teleportation hall, he sensed that the city's atmosphere had changed. During his last visit, a depressing energy and dense killing intent had fallen over the city. Now, however, excitement almost crackled in the air. Far fewer guild players wandered the city streets, replaced by far more adventurer team players than before. As Shifeng wandered through the city, he could hear players discussing the recent events in the Witch's Hill. Zero Wing is so amazing. It captured 2 of the Starlight Alliance's guild towns back to back. Not even the various superpowers have accomplished such a feat. Who would have thought that Zero Wing had such a powerful foundation? After its defeat, the Starlight Alliance disbanded. The corporations supporting it have already pulled out their investments. I don't think it'll be long before Zero Wing removed the guilds that participated in the alliance from the kingdom. Who told those guilds to be so arrogant and make an enemy of Zero Wing? Didn't they see how Zero Wing became Star Moon Kingdom's overlord in the first place? They're just reaping what they sow. I know, right? I've heard that Zero Wing's giant players were responsible for capturing both guild towns. They're 4 meters tall and have immeasurable strength. Their defense is off the charts too. The town's defense turrets barely left a scratch on them. With Zero Wing's home ground advantage, who would dare provoke the guild in the Witch's Hill now? It really makes you wonder how Zero Wing managed to convert so many players into giants. I wish I could become a giant player too. Isn't that simple? Just join Zero Wing. Since Zero Wing can convert so many players into giants, it's natural that it can do so with even more players. The conversion price is the only concern now. That's right. After its victory in the Witch's Hill, independent players in the kingdom are rushing to join Zero Wing in the hopes of securing a conversion slot. Although living in human cities will be inconvenient after joining a neutral race, the combat power you get in return is definitely worth it. Moreover, once we reach higher levels, we'll be able to explore more neutral maps. The inconveniences players face as a neutral race will become insignificant. Honestly, it isn't really necessary to join Zero Wing if you want to become a giant. All of the powers in God's domain, aside from those in Starmoon Kingdom, have begun to look into the conversion process due to the performance of Zero Wing's giant players. They all hope to amass their own force of giant experts. It is only a matter of time before someone reveals the conditions for becoming a giant. Once they do, even independent players like us will have an opportunity to convert. The independent players on the streets talked about the battle in the Witch's Hill passionately. Their eyes glowed as they discussed Zero Wing's giant players, and many of them wanted to convert. At this point, both independent players and the various powers were eager to become giant players. The era of the giants had officially begun. Seeing this, Shifeng merely smiled as he continued toward the candlelight trading firm. While the giant race was impressively powerful, it also had glaring flaws. These flaws included promotion difficulty. Without a guild support, even expert players would struggle to reach Tier 3. Shifeng had only chosen to convert 1,000 shield warriors and berserkers into giants due to Zero Wing's precarious position. Normally, he would have only converted players after ensuring that they understood the implications of the process. Of course, these giant players could return to their human state at the cost of a few levels. If they struggled with their Tier 3 promotion quests, they could simply convert back. A few lost levels wouldn't be a problem compared to gaining the giant race's advantages while they were still at Tier 2. Moreover, he could determine the truly talented players among the group by converting them into giants. Before converting, no one would know whether or not they'd be suitable for the race. Once he discovered these talented players, he could grant them the Titan Bloodline, reducing their promotion difficulty and allowing them to shine as true giant experts. As for the various large guilds' search into the giant conversion, both Aqua Rose and Youlan had expressed some concerns on the matter. However, Shifeng paid it no mind. It was only a matter of time before the public discovered Thunder Axe City, and he had already activated the teleportation array that led to it. Moreover, players would need some time to complete the conversion quest. If they used the normal method of becoming a giant meanwhile, Zero Wing would reap all of the possible benefits from the giant race. It wasn't long before Shifeng reached his destination. When he arrived at the candlelight trading firm, he found that Melancholic Smile had already prepared the necessary manpower and materials to begin the Guardian Puppets production. Zero Wing urgently needed capable combatants, so it should work on increasing its members' levels and the number of giant players in its employ, but in Shifeng's opinion, producing the Guardian Puppets was more meaningful. In the past, war weapons like the combat puppets were a large part of the reason that the various second- and third-rate guilds had survived the presence of first-rate guilds and superpowers. Sin Realm's decision to use the steel puppet against him had been foolish. Combat puppets weren't meant to kill individual players. They were only truly valuable when they defended or attacked towns and cities. Had Sin Realm utilized its steel puppet to protect Golden Flow Town, capturing the town would have been far more challenging. If Sin Realm had used enough combat puppets, Shifeng would have been forced to rely on more than just his giant players. Likewise, if he crafted a certain number of Guardian Puppets, the various superpowers wouldn't be able to threaten Zero Wing. Inside his spacious special forging room, a small mountain of materials sat atop his work desk. These materials would only be enough to produce one power source for the Guardian Puppet. Let's begin. Shifeng took in a deep breath as he examined the design and materials before him. He then activated the Soul Fire's and Philosopher's Hand's abilities, quickly melting down the fine Titan ingots and mana stones on the table. The most difficult part of constructing the Guardian Puppet was its power source. To attempt the production, one had to be an intermediate master forger at the very least. Moreover, an intermediate master would have a painfully low success rate. Fortunately, the Philosopher's Hand's ability could upgrade Shifeng to Advanced Master Forger for a short time. This was why Shifeng dared to attempt producing the Guardian Puppet. Time passed quickly. Before he had realized it, half a day had passed since Shifeng had begun to work on the Guardian Puppet. Dark Knight Empire, Silver Pine City. Silver Pine City was the 7th largest NPC city in the Dark Knight Empire and fully under the 100 Flowers Palace's jurisdiction. However, players from other large guilds roamed the city as if they owned the place. It did not look like the 100 Flowers Palace's territory. Meanwhile, the normally lively 100 Flowers Palace residence was as quiet as the grave. The palace's members watched one guild upper echelon after another enter the guild hall's first-floor hall, shock gripping their hearts when they saw the upper echelon's faces. Some of these upper echelons had come from other kingdoms and empires, and even the rarely seen guild elders made an appearance. What's going on? Why are all of the guild's upper echelons gathering here? Isn't that Crimson Heart the first vice guild leader? Wasn't she managing the branch guild in the Holy Hill Kingdom? She's actually made a trip here? The 100 Flowers Palace's members went into an uproar when they saw the silver-armored, soldierly woman with crimson eyes. Although Crimson Heart was the guild's first vice-guild leader, she disagreed with the guild leader's management choices and had led a group of players to develop in the Holy Hill Kingdom. Her endeavors in the kingdom had been quite successful, and she paid no heed to the main branch's matters. Even when the palace's main branch had fallen into a precarious state, she had refused to make an appearance. The guild's members had never expected Crimson Heart to visit the main branch at this time. When the crowd saw the 3 players following Crimson Heart, they couldn't help but gape. The highest-leveled player among them had reached level 61. At that level, one could rank among the top 30 experts on the Dark Knight Empire's ranking list. Moreover, all 3 players wore level 60 equipment, with the weakest piece at Secret Silver rank. Level 60 Secret Silver equipment was currently considered top-tier equipment, and not even the various superpowers had many pieces. In addition, these 3 players had a few pieces of level 60 fine gold equipment on them. Most importantly, they all wore 2 or 3 pieces of epic equipment. It was a dazzling sight. Many of the 100 Flowers Palace's upper echelons were stupefied to see these 3 players as well. They had never considered that Crimson Heart's development in the Holy Hill Kingdom had been so profitable. Crimson, you're finally here. And here I thought that you planned to abandon the 100 Flowers Palace. A level 60 tier 2 male berserker carrying a great sword on his back commented, smiling when he saw Crimson Heart enter the meeting room. My opinions simply differ from the guild leaders, but I am still a member of the 100 Flowers Palace. Of course, I have to make an appearance for such an important matter. Moreover, Rue has fallen too far. The 100 Flowers Pavilion can solve its own problems. We don't need outsiders' help. Crimson Heart sapped, frowning as a flash of rage lit her eyes. As soon as Crimson Heart fell silent, a commotion broke out outside of the meeting room. Shortly after, cleansed Rue joined the guild's upper echelons with a dozen or so players trailing behind her, all of which wore a 6-winged emblem on their chests. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.